Growing Pains. Katamari 999. Summary. Growing Up Haddock Story 7. Life for the Haddock family has been turbulent over the last year and a half, but things get more complicated when a lot of mysterious accidents start to plague the village. Is it just bad weather and unruly dragons, or is there something more sinister at work? Only HTTYD and Riders/Defenders of Berk are canon. Chapter 1, Hushed Voices. Chapter Text. This is Berk. We may be small, but we are strong. And I'm not just talking about the dragons we adopt into our families. We have a full armory all ready to retaliate if we get attacked. We have hundreds of men and women trained in combat just in case something happens. But strength is about more than brute force. Strength isn't always something you can see on the outside. The strongest man in the world can appear to be small and clumsy. And the weakest can have bulging muscles. Our strength comes from within. It comes from those we love and our willingness to stand for what's right. Unfortunately, a lot of people seem to forget that fact. And it's up to all of us to remind them of what it means to be strong. Even if they don't want to hear it. Clang. Fearless Finn Haddock jumped back instinctively as sparks flew from the sword he was fixing. He peered intensely at the weapon in his hand, trying to figure out if he was finished getting it in the right shape or if he needed to pound it some more. He was getting better at making that distinction, but the smoke and the heat from the fire was making him feel a tad light-headed. Shaking his head in an attempt to clear it, he peered at the red-hot metal until its light started to put a giant blue splotch in the middle of his line of vision. Anyone else in Finn's position would have taken a well-deserved rest. But not him. The boy had been up since dawn and he hadn't set foot outside the forge except to use the outhouse. And whenever he did that, he had to squint to block out the exceptionally bright rays beating down on him from the hot sun. And then it was back to work, his body dripping with sweat, his hands covered in bandages to protect them from the many dangerous tools he worked with day in and day out, his undershirt sticking to his skin almost like it was glued there. And Finn simply loved it. He loved the loud sounds of the crackling fire, bubbling water and metal, clanging of the tools. Honestly, if his parents didn't make him take weekends off, he'd be here every single day. Well, I see you're in the zone. Again came a voice from across the room. Don't come over here, I'll carry these ridiculously heavy boxes all by myself. Finn, used to his mentor's sarcasm, hastened over to help lighten the load. Gobber smiled appreciatively at him. You're all right, Fearless Finn, he said cheerfully, ruffling the boy's hair and then making a face at the sheer amount of sweat dripping off his fingers. Finn grinned impishly at his mentor's look of disgust. Don't worry, I bet it's good for your skin. Don't sass me. Gobber retorted, looking rather amused. Like father, like son. Not really. Finn said hastily. I'm much better at this than he ever was. You've got the muscles for it. Gobber patted Finn's shoulder. But you could do with a bit more ingenuity. Now why don't you take a break? A break? Finn acted as if this comment had offended him. You're crazy. I just got started. It's 2 in the afternoon. Gobber narrowed his eyes at his apprentice. You ease. Finn stretched out the word, his grin widening. So eat lunch. Gobber insisted. Or I won't let you come in tomorrow. Finn grumbled but obeyed, grabbing his bag of food and walking across the room with it. Outside. What's wrong with in here? You stink. That doesn't stop you. Gobber gave his apprentice a look that wasn't quite dangerous yet, but Finn knew it would be soon. He quickly scrambled to his feet and exited the forge. It felt like he had stepped into Asgard itself. The sun's rays seemed to blind him. Summer was definitely descending upon Berk and Finn didn't like it one bit. Aside from his birthday, he hated everything about summer. He hated hail for obvious reasons, the heat for making the forge even hotter, and the sun for scorching his skin, making his freckles far more pronounced, and his making his hair so brightly red that he could be easily spotted even from hundreds of feet above the village. But, he had to admit, being able to leave the forge in nothing but an undershirt and shorts was rather convenient. Well, look who decided to emerge, a cheerful voice rang from across the village square. Finn looked over, his face twisting into a satisfied smile as he watched his girlfriend hurry over, her short blonde hair bobbing behind her head. I'm here under protest. Finn explained, a mischievous glint in his eye. But I have to say, coming outside was worth it for the attractive atmosphere. He gazed up and down Helga Ingerman's figure almost hungrily. I'd say the same, but you look like you just dove into the lake. Helga made a face. And you smell like my brother's used socks. Ah, good, I was hoping you'd notice my change in cologne. Finn quipped. All part of what makes me so sexy. You disgust me. Helga giggled, taking a step back when Finn leaned toward her for a kiss. I can live with that. Finn narrowed his eyes. Well, if you won't kiss me, give me a hug. No. How dare you reject the advances of a future chief? Finn puffed his chest out. You are not fit to be a hooligan. So make me leave. Helga crossed her arms and stared into his eyes unblinkingly. Make me make you. Make me make you make me. You know what? Finn mock sighed. I'm feeling generous today. But next time I see you, I'm getting that kiss. Bathe and I might enjoy it. Helga winked at him. Put on cologne and it could be international. You know I always like to experiment with other cultures. Finn tittered as his girlfriend walked away, his eyes fixed on her swaying posterior as she went. The haddock boy eventually decided that he wanted to eat his lunch in the cove today. He strutted into the village square, his head held high and a smirk on his face. Several children scurried to get out of his way as he approached. He wouldn't have stepped aside even if they hadn't. When he reached the edge of the square, he turned to look at the people he had just passed. A few children met his eye and immediately looked away, two of them actually trembling as they gathered their toys and made a break for it. Finn felt a rush of satisfaction. Perhaps eating lunch outside had been a good idea after all. Adriana Miracle Haddock was more impatient than she'd ever been in her entire life. Her fingernails were chewed until they couldn't be chewed anymore. Her bright green eyes glanced upward at the slightest movement. Her long blonde hair flipped around when she turned on her heel to continue her pacing. She made small groaning noises almost every time she looked in the sky and saw nothing on the horizon. Adriana, maybe you should sit down. Hiccup Horrendous Haddock 3, who was starting to feel rather dizzy as he watched his daughter's constant movements, gestured to the empty space next to him on a nearby bench. No. Adriana replied shortly. I can't stay still. He'll be coming whether you're nervous or not. Astrid Horferson Haddock reminded her with a small smile. And besides, you've gone to visit him every other weekend for the last year. Is this really so different? Of course. Adriana began to bounce on her toes as she continued to gaze into the sky. He never comes to Burke. What if he doesn't like it? Doesn't like Burke? Hiccup laughed, shaking his head. Burke will seem like paradise compared to where he's coming from. You don't know that. Adriana said in an increasingly panicky tone. You've only met him twice. Yes, but he's made his opinion of Ali the insincere rather obvious. Hiccup replied calmly. And we've gotten along swimmingly. I know, but he's still oh my gods. Adriana squealed and put her hands over her mouth. I think that's him. Hiccup and Astrid looked up to see a red speck on the horizon that was slowly approaching the island. Adriana ran her fingers through her hair, adjusted her headband, and smoothed out her shirt and trousers. She folded her fingers in front of her chest and forced herself to stay still as she endured every agonizing second of the Changewing's descent. It didn't take long for its rider to come into view. The teenage boy was tall with tanned skin and brown hair. While not muscular per se, he did appear to have strong arms and legs judging by his grip on his dragon's reins. His posture was casual and the smile on his face indicated that he was every bit as happy to be there as the Haddock girl was to see him. The moment he landed, he ran up and threw his arms around her. Nani, he exclaimed as he nearly crushed her in his arms. Gods, it's good to see a pretty face again. Adriana blushed scarlet and bit her lip bashfully. Likewise, she said in a timid voice. The boy raised an eyebrow at her. Oh, not pretty. I mean not that you're not good looking, but I more or less meant to say Han. She stopped when he placed his pointer finger on her lips. I know what you meant, the teenager said playfully. It's nice to see you again, Brandine. Hiccup walked up and held out his hand, which Brandine enthusiastically shook. All packed up, I see, he added, nodding to the bags tied to the changewing. You know it. Brandine laughed and sauntered over to his dragon. Had to get off that sorry excuse for a territory as soon as possible. I don't blame you. Hiccup walked over with him, his giddy daughter excitedly following. Welcome to Berk. Thanks. Brandine patted his dragon on the head. It's all right, Sid, he said in a soothing voice, you'll be able to lie down in a second. Hey, he turned back to Hiccup, I don't mean to speed things up, but my dragon buddy needs a drink of water and a nap. Do you have a pen or something? I can do you one better. Hiccup gestured for the teenager to follow him. We've got your house all ready. The pen is pretty standard, but there's room for you to play around with it some. Sweet. Brandine exclaimed. Lead on. You're going to love it here. Adriana skipped merrily along beside him, causing him to chuckle. Lots of dragon stuff going on and sports and books, and it looks really pretty in the winter with all the snow. Bet it'll pale in comparison to some of the prettier attractions on the island. Brandine winked at her and she giggled. No starting that up again. Hiccup warned the boy, who merely huffed a bit. Oh but Chief. Brandine whined. It's not my fault your daughter's so cute. He's got a point. Astrid said, nudging her husband. She does have your face. Very funny. Hiccup deadpanned. But keep it clean, you two, or Brandine's going right back where he came from. You don't have to worry about that. Brandine clapped Hiccup on the back. Your girl's off limits until further notice, I know. Good, you remember. Hiccup narrowed his eyes at the boy, who only smiled wider. But I mean it. Of course you do. Brandine smiled cheekily at the haddock girl. There'll be no funny business. We're just friends, right Nani? Oh, yes. Adriana pointed to a small house. There it is. I get a garden and everything. Brandine clapped Hiccup on the back again. Clearly you've pulled out all the stops. It used to be a guest house, but it needed a bit of fixing up, so we thought you'd like a project. Hiccup told him as he opened the wooden door. There were only 3 rooms in the house. The main one had a fire pit and places to put cooking ingredients and supplies. A small couch was placed against the wall. The doors to Brandine's washroom and bedroom were on a wall to the left. Home sweet home. Brandine exclaimed excitedly. What do you think, Sid? He turned to his dragon, who cooed contentedly. Looks like we're all set. Great. We'll leave you to your unpacking. I've got a village meeting I've got to prepare. Hiccup patted Brandine on the back before turning toward the door. Hang on, there's a meeting. Brandine raised an eyebrow. What sort of meeting? Well. Hiccup scratched his chin idly. Honestly, this place is usually pretty peaceful, but there have been some incidents. Such as? You don't need to worry about that right this second. I imagine Adriana'll fill you in after the meeting. Hiccup opened the door. Hang on, if this meeting is for the residents of Berk, I want to go. Brandine hurried over to the doorway. I live here now. Might as well, you know. That's really nice of you, Brandine, but I imagine you've got a lot of unpacking to do. Astrid spoke up. Besides, these meetings tend to run long. Our chief is a real rambler. Hiccup narrowed his eyes at his wife, who merely grinned mischievously at him. Well. He turned back to Brandine, if you're sure you want to go. Absolutely. Brandine nodded vigorously. I can unpack any time. But a big important meeting. Can't miss out on that. Okay, well, it'll start in about half an hour. Adriana, you can show him where the Great Hall is. If you need anything, just holler. Hiccup nodded to his daughter and her friend before leaving the house, his wife at his heels. I'm really proud of you. Astrid said the second they were outside. Proud. You handled a guy flirting with our daughter extremely well. She put an arm around him as they walked toward the hall. I'm glad you're letting her grow up. More like I trust her not to do anything stupid. Hiccup said shortly. She's a smart girl. Yeah, she is. Astrid slid her hand down and slipped her fingers between his. And you two will be best friends again. Do we have to talk about this now? Hiccup tightened his hold on her hand. I've got a lot of work to do. And even if I didn't, these always end up being circular conversations that never solve anything. Astrid reached up and kissed him on the cheek. I know. But they are still conversations worth having. Doesn't make it hurt less. Hiccup mumbled. So I think you should start off the meeting with the farming stuff. Astrid said briskly. Don't want to go into all the heavy stuff right away. Right. Hiccup cracked a smile at his wife's abrupt subject change. She could always tell when he needed to focus on something else. And this was definitely the time to put his mind on other matters, even for a short period of time. Whoa! Adriana's eyes widened as she stared into a small box she'd retrieved from one of Brandine's bags. That's a lot of rocks. Brandine sauntered over and peered at the box. Oh yeah. Don't laugh, but I like to collect them. Anything that looks interesting. Like that one. He pointed to one on the side. It's almost the exact shape of a gronkel, don't you think? Yeah, it is. Adriana picked up the rock to inspect it. Weird. Yeah, they're cool. Brandine took the book out of her hands. But don't tell anyone I'm that much of a dork. Adriana rolled her eyes. You're not a dork. Says you. Brandine placed the box on a shelf before turning back to the Haddock girl. So tell me a bit more about Burke. Anyone here I need to look out for? Finn. Adriana replied shortly. And anyone he hangs out with? Yeah, I kind of figured. Brandine sat down next to her. Hey, what about Morgan and Taryn and all them? Do I get to meet them or did you just make them up? Oh yeah, of course. Adriana gave him a very fake smile. Sure thing, I'll introduce you to them after the meeting. Nice. This day keeps getting better and better. Brandine narrowed his eyes at her. So why the long face? What do you mean? You're not a very good actress, Nani. Brandine said, fixing her with a very penetrating gaze. Something's not quite right about that pretty smile of yours. Adriana swallowed and finally allowed her false smile to melt off her face. You know, none of them are as interesting as you. I don't know, they were the best I could do if I needed someone to talk to. They'll lighten up. Brandine said reassuringly. I'll make sure that they do. He stood back up. As long as I finish off this unpacking, that is. Boring. I'll say. Adriana cracked a small but very genuine smile as she stood up to continue to help. Oh my, she exclaimed after opening the closest box. I'm sorry. Her face went scarlet as she immediately shut it. Discovered the skivvies box, have you? Brandine chortled as he sauntered over and picked it up. I can unpack that one just fine by myself, he added as he tossed it into the open doorway to his bedroom. Not that I'm ashamed of my skivvies, of course. Why would you be ashamed of them? Adriana peeked inside the next box she opened and was relieved to see it full of clean shirts. Oh yeah, I guess it's not shameful as much as awkward. Don't want everyone to know how big they are. Brandine grinned cheekily at her. Why would that matter? Adriana asked, eyebrow raised. Oh nothing, he said hastily just before clearing his throat rather loudly. Sorry, I just say the first thing that pops into my head sometimes, but don't worry about it. Adriana noticed his cheeks go slightly pink before he turned away. So are you sure you want to go to the village meeting? Adriana asked him as she began putting the food he'd brought along into cupboards. Well, if I'm going to be living here, I need to meet everyone and learn what it's like to live here. Brandine replied with a shrug. Even if the chief is long-winded at times. You don't know the half of it, the Haddock girl grumbled. There was a long pause as the teenagers continued to put things away and unpack the contents of the boxes Brandine had brought along. Adriana found herself feeling extremely uncomfortable after a few seconds. Silence was usually a bad sign when she was spending time with a friend. She was happiest when discussions moved fluidly from one topic to the next, but to not have anything to say, now that was uncomfortable. But just as she was about to make an excuse to head up to the Great Hall a bit early, Brandine turned and spoke to her. Nice headband. Adriana looked up. Brandine was leaning against the door frame and staring at her with a smile on his face. She felt heat rise to her face. Thanks. Brandine's eyebrows furrowed. How come you stopped wearing flowers? What? Flowers? In your hair? You used to wear them. What happened? Brandine's eyes refused to waver as he stared at her. That was a long time ago. Adriana straightened her headband. Why are you asking this now? Well, when we visit each other, you've always got your hair up, so of course you're not going to have a flower in it. It'd blow away. Brandine furrowed his brow. I didn't realize you stopped wearing them altogether. Well, that was kid stuff. Adriana shrugged, irritated with her face at retaining its heat. Figured I might as well dress like people my age. The headband looks nice. Brandine reached forward and tucked a few flyaway strands of hair behind her ear. Adriana felt her knees weaken slightly. Red suits you. His eyes flitted to her shirt. Green too. You look a lot more grown up. I probably look like a Snoggletop tree. Adriana quipped with a half smile. Nah, you'd have to be wearing loads of colorful jewelry to look like that. Brandine straightened up again. So what time is this meeting? Probably soon. Adriana said, straightening her headband and running her fingers through her hair. We should go. Well, I mean we as in both of us, we don't have to go together. I would be honored to take you. Brandine reached out and opened the front door. After you, milady, he mock-bowed, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Adriana giggled and walked through the door, Brandine following. As they walked to the great hall, the girl clasped her hands behind her back and listened to her friend's excited chatter with a smile. She hadn't been so excited in a long time. Her best friend finally lived within walking distance, her birthday was coming up, and she was finally accepted by her peers. Life was definitely. Her eyes locked onto a head of wavy blonde hair walking just ahead of them. Her stomach lurched and her heart felt suddenly constricted. She gritted her teeth and looked up at Brandine, who didn't seem to notice her change of expression. When she finally looked ahead again, the blonde head had disappeared into the crowd of Burkians filing into the great hall. Yes, life was definitely improving, but it was far from perfect. Inga Jorgensen absolutely hated village meetings. They weren't very frequent, but every single one was so boring, she could barely keep her eyes open. Putting her cheek on her fist and her elbow on the windowsill of a small window, she stared outside at a cluster of terrible terrors who were fighting over a loaf of bread they had undoubtedly pilfered from someone's food storage. Something about working together as a village to fix a few issues in public buildings. Talking about community. Inga could practically recite Hiccup's speeches as if she herself had written them. The hot hall was beginning to make her feel lightheaded. The red terror had the bread, a yellow one pounced on it, a green one used the commotion to sneak the bread away from the other two. They noticed and leaped on him. On and on it went, Hiccup's droning voice in the background, a few nods and words of assent from the crowd. Oh, why was she now required to attend these now that she was older than 10? 10 wasn't nearly old enough to benefit from any of this. And 11, Inga reasoned, was scarcely more than 10. She watched jealously as a few 9-year-olds snatched the bread from the terrors and hurried away, their gales of laughter echoing in Inga's ears. 2 years ago, she'd have been among them. Stupid meetings. The Jorgensen girl might have fallen asleep had Hiccup not changed topics the moment her eyes fluttered shut. We could chalk the damage at Mulch and Bucket's barn to some unruly dragons and the storm that blew in last week, except the same damage seems to have happened at Hawks. Hiccup was saying in a clear, crisp voice devoid of its frequently sarcastic tone. I don't know what that means, exactly, but if anyone has any questions, concerns, or information, I'd like you to speak with me about it promptly. Whatever is going on is interfering with these families' lives and they need to get back to work without having to worry about unforeseen damages, the hooligan chief concluded. Damages? What was this about? Inga scanned the crowd with her eyes and realized with a jolt that a lot of them seemed concerned about the chief's most recent words. What sort of damages was Hiccup talking about? The meeting ended soon after that and Inga immediately hopped out of her chair the moment "You're dismissed" escaped Hiccup's throat. I don't know, Heather, her father was saying. I went by Hawks the day before his shop was damaged and everything looked fine. And if dragons did it, there would have been scorch marks. You don't think someone actually destroyed these buildings intentionally, do you? Heather asked, looking concerned as she glanced around at her fellow Burkians. I'm not saying anything. I'd have thought the Thorsten twins might have had something to do with it, but they always get caught. Snotlout said grimly. Maybe it was our twins. Vidar and Dustin were among the first people to help Hawk clean up. Heather reminded him. Not exactly something one does after one has caused the damage in the first place. Guess we'll just have to keep an eye out. Snotlout said as he allowed Heather out of the door ahead of him. Inga hung back for a while, watching her fellow hooligans leaving the Great Hall and talking in hushed tones. She furrowed her brow. She didn't like it when her people were this worried. As she looked around, she was slightly alarmed to see that the only people who didn't seem to be at all concerned about the damaged property were the people close to her age. She wondered how Finn, who she had noticed nodding in agreement toward the beginning of the meeting, could be laughing and play fighting when there were real problems to address. It was like he didn't care at all about his own future tribe. And Adriana, she was too busy talking to a tall, handsome teenager Inga had never seen before. Even the Thorsten twins looked concerned, so why didn't the youth care at all that there was a chance their tribe was being destroyed from the inside? Well, she cared. And she was going to get to the bottom of this. She was clever. She was sneaky. She was a Jorgensen. And Jorgensens never back down, after all. Chapter 2, Familiar Strangers. Chapter text. Adriana felt rather cheerful that afternoon when she made her way to the Thorstens. She waved to Tough Nut, who was heading to work for a few extra hours. Ordinarily he wouldn't be working so hard, but the reason for that was lying on the couch, smiling at the Haddock girl as she walked in. Svala Thorsten was pretty with long brown hair that curled in all the right places, brown eyes, and a graceful demeanor that offered quite a contrast to her husband's rather, well, tough one. But today, like every day in the recent months, she was slightly deterred by a large, round belly, an indicator of her fourth and, so far, most successful pregnancy. At last, she exclaimed by way of a greeting. A new face. Adriana grinned. Getting tired of Tough Nut? Wouldn't you if he was the only person to talk to for days? Svala patted the chair next to the couch. Stay a while, why don't you? Sure. Adriana exclaimed cheerfully. She was always up to chatting with a new friend, and, with very little to do in the past few weeks, Svala was rapidly becoming a good friend indeed. I got you the books you asked for. Matilda insisted that I added this one about raising toddlers, but I don't think that's a concern at the moment. Not yet, anyway. Svala agreed, putting the books beside the couch. So how have you been doing? Getting to know your gentleman friend? It's not like that. Adriana protested through a blush. I mean, we've been writing, but we haven't been together in person all that long. Is that so? Svala shifted her seat to get a better look at the teenager. I seem to remember you flying off to see him every other weekend for the last year. Well, Adriana said sheepishly. That's different. He never came here. Never had the time. And this is Burke. I mean, we've got fishing and hunting and a charming view of the ocean. She looked out the window at her brother strutting around the village square like he owned the place. And the only problems are the pests. She turned back to Svala, who looked amused by that statement. But beyond all that, I don't see anything that stands out or sets us apart. Lowest number of missing limbs in the archipelago after your dad became chief. Svala said quite seriously. Well, that's not hard since he kind of abolished dragon fighting and everyone has had plenty of time to get used to the culture shift. Adriana shook her head with a small smile. I mean, how many other ways are there to lose a limb? You could chop it off yourself. Svala suggested. That would be pretty effective. Adriana laughed. And stupid. We're Vikings. It's in the job description. Svala quipped. But seriously, it is an accomplishment to be proud of. Fair enough. So now we're the safest island in the archipelago. That's an exciting distinction. Adriana rolled her eyes. My point is that, I guess, Brandine's going to have to make a lot of changes to assimilate to our culture, and I don't know if he'll want to. Maybe it's the fact that I've been cooped up here for a long time, Svala said rather knowingly, but I think you're worth that. Maybe. Adriana said dismissively. How are you feeling? Bored and ready to drop this kid? Svala patted her belly. Tell me what I'm having, will you? It'd ruin the surprise. Adriana protested. But Lily's never wrong and I want to know what I'm going to painfully give birth to. She rubbed her belly and Adriana saw a tiny movement under her tunic. Maybe Lily doesn't know. Adriana said mischievously. Maybe I'm just a really good guesser. Then guess. Svala grabbed Adriana's hand and placed it on her belly. What's it feel like? Like a bag with an irate terrible terror in it. Adriana joked. Svala laughed just as her baby wiggled enough for Adriana to feel something. Come on, you're due next week. Can't you wait? I could, Svala said, her face twisting into a pout, but I want to know before, tough nut. You've asked at least a dozen times and has my answer ever changed? No. Svala sighed deeply. But I was hoping it would when you see how boring it is here and how little I have to do and, oh, come on. I just want to know which pronoun to use. Adriana looked her over for a moment. Svala's eyes were wide, her expression pleading. The Haddock girl felt another kick under her hand and finally decided to give in. Oh, all right, but don't tell anyone I told you. She leaned in. I'm making your baby a present, you know. What's that got to do with it? Svala frowned. Everything, said Adriana with a sly smile. See, I thought I'd make something simple. So I'm making her a little pink skirt and it's so see. Svala gasped loudly enough to cut her off. It's a girl. Adriana nodded, feeling very warm inside at how happy her friend looked. Svala smiled down at her protruding midsection and lovingly stroked it. She seemed more excited than ever. Oh, Tough Nut's going to be in for a treat. Svala laughed. He doesn't know anything about girls. Well, he's about to have a very educational experience. Adriana grinned at her. They were silent for a moment, both feeling the baby's movements under Svala's skin. Adriana found herself rather fascinated by the whole thing. The idea of carrying a life inside of her for 9 months and then bringing it into the world both terrified and intrigued her. As she felt another movement, she finally voiced the pressing question on her mind. What's it feel like? Well, it's probably a bit like you might imagine it. Svala explained. At first it felt like little flutters, but then they got stronger as she got bigger. She suddenly fixed her eyes on Adriana. But I expect you'll find out for yourself one day. I hope so, said Adriana. Maybe if I get married. If you get married. Svala nearly rolled her eyes. There is no if in that equation. It's going to happen. You've got a lovely personality. I talk too much. And a beautiful face. Which is covered in acne. You've got qualities every man should be looking for. Yeah, every man wants a woman who almost never cleans up after herself. Come on, you're just making excuses. Svala placed her hand on top of Adriana's. You're a catch. I know I'm not exactly an authority on that since I'm obviously not male, but there aren't many girls out there who have the creativity and intelligence that you have. Not to mention the compassion. If you say so. I do say so. Svala patted Adriana's hand a few times before looking over at the small stack of books beside her. So what else have you brought? Another spaceman book. Adriana smiled at her friend before turning to her books, her mind mercifully turned away from herself. She knew Svala was just saying all of those things to make her feel better and she appreciated the gesture, but there was no way she could believe it. There wasn't anything special about her at all. She was kind to others because she wanted to be accepted. She was decent at coming up with stories, but Burke didn't have any jobs for people with that particular gift. She shook her head to clear it and turned to the books. She had brought another spaceman book, after all, and any moment spent reading it was a moment well spent. Erik Larson used to enjoy family parties. There was something about the laughter and the food and the conversations that made him feel like he belonged to something truly special. His father would joke with him about his mother's constant rushing around, trying to make sure everything was perfect, and Gustav was always good for a laugh. The addition of 2 brothers and sisters-in-law, 4 nephews, and a niece made these parties truly fun, exciting events. But life changed in what seemed like a split second sometimes, bringing differences to everything in its wake. The family parties were no exception. Rather than being about fellowship and closeness, Eric's mother had decided they were about organization. Lara Larson exclaimed cheerfully as she thrust Eric to a cabinet, the top of which was covered in all sorts of odds and ends. Make it look nice. Eric, who thought anything covered in children's artwork and sculptures already looked nice, frowned. How am I supposed to do that? Put anything that doesn't look nice into the cabinet, she called as she bustled over to Nicholas, Eric's older brother. The floor looks perfect, what would I do without you? Probably criticize me some more. Eric mumbled, picking up each piece of artwork and inspecting it. And Mel, he heard Lara exclaim from across the room. You're doing a good job but a bit less frosting. There you go, perfect. Eric stared at the clay dragon he now held in his hand. A grey lump with indiscernible shapes sticking out from all over. The only reason he knew he was supposed to be a dragon was because he had made it himself when he was about 5 years old. He glanced at his mother, who was beaming at his sister-in-law as she frosted a very decadent cake, and put the lumpy dragon in the cabinet. The front door opened and shut behind Eric and he became acutely aware of little footfalls now echoing around the house. Gustav and Michaela were here and with them came 3 of Eric's nephews, both so energetic that it sounded more like there was a yak stampede going through the room rather than the pounding footfalls of 3 little boys. We're not late, are we? Asked Michaela tentatively. I don't see anyone else here. Told you we weren't late, Gustav. She said 3. Actually, Lara said with a small laugh, I said 3:30. But it doesn't matter. I can always use a bit of help. A few of my helpers, she cast a withering gaze on her youngest son, lack the energy. Eric wanted to feel offended by these words, but passive aggression was beginning to become a staple of his mother's behavior toward him. A year and a half without his father's interference in these exchanges had toughened Eric's resolve not to care that his mother didn't think much of him. He knew she never had, but now she could be a bit more obvious about it. The next 30 minutes dragged on until Eric was seriously considering running off and flying on charger for a bit just to get out of the house. His demeanor changed, however, when his brother-in-law finally arrived. Kurt Brand, who had married out exactly 2 years ago, had thick auburn hair that fell a bit longer than Lara liked, though she never did any more than stare disapprovingly at it, large, rather round blue eyes, and always had a bit of scruff on his face. Eric liked the scruff, he thought it gave his brother-in-law a more rugged appearance and made him wonder if he could pull off the look himself, but hadn't been brave enough to give it a try. But Kurt, though always quite friendly with the youngest Larson, wasn't the reason Eric's spirits lifted. Kurt's younger sister Taryn followed him into the house, looking every bit as uncomfortable as she always did when in the same room as Lara. The moment she saw Eric, she hurried over. Oh, thank gods you're here, she muttered to him so only he could hear her. Stupid anniversary parties. Why does the whole family have to get together? Torture. Eric said simply, causing her to smile. It'll be over soon enough. Besides, I bet you don't have many awkward silences at home. This'll be a welcome change. There's never any silence at home. Taryn said exasperatedly, glancing at her 12-year-old brother Alton as he hung up his coat. Not with that one around. Oh, I know. Eric laughed when Alton let out a shout of excitement and started tearing around the house with Gustav's oldest son. But there's not a lot of noise here anymore, so it's a good change every once and a while. I'll trade any day. Taryn said through her teeth. Me too. Eric agreed. But looks like Magnus is here, so we'd better go in and act like we're as excited as everyone else. But I am excited. Taryn nudged him with her arm. I get to see you. That's a plus. Okay. Eric conceded with a grin. When you put it that way, it doesn't sound like complete torture. Stop being a big baby. Taryn pushed him toward the large table in the center of the room. It'll be fine. The dinner was devoured, the kids were already playing outside, and the adults were, as usual, still sitting around and talking. Both Taryn and Eric knew it was extremely rude to get up from the table early, but from the looks they gave each other, they knew they were thinking the same thing. Our moms could go on forever if they didn't need to sleep eventually. Taryn mumbled to Eric, causing him to smile. Well, that means we'll be here for a few more hours. Eric mumbled back with a cheeky grin. Might as well make the best of it. Want to make out? Taryn let out a laugh that she instantly turned into a hacking cough. A little forward, aren't you? I don't know, they might kick us out. Eric chuckled. Just wondering if that was a risk worth taking. I'd really rather have your mom like me than become that little hussy to women over 50. Taryn quipped. Yes, because kissing a boy is a doorway to such dastardly activities. Eric leaned on his fist. But you're probably right. I don't need her looking down on me more than she already does. She doesn't look down on you, Taryn assured him. There was a pause in which Lara's speech drifted over to them from across the table. Was so proud that my daughter found someone from such an outstanding family, she was saying to Kurt. I was sort of afraid she'd wind up with that boy, remember him, out. You kissed him on a dare when you were 7, don't know when I saw Olaf more flustered. Oh yeah, Holvard. Out laughed at the memory. Well, I did think he was cute. You were cute too. Absolutely adorable. I remember telling Olaf, I said she's going to give you some trouble, this one, because she'll be the heartbreaker. She'll be snatched up as soon as she's of age and then we'll have an empty nest. Of course, Lara added with a frown, that was when we thought she'd be the youngest. Eric rolled his eyes and gave the tiniest glare. Okay, I think I'll go off and be invisible somewhere, he said rather loudly as he got up and stomped out of the room. Before any of the adults could say a word, Taryn quickly got up to follow. You don't have to be so abrasive, Eric grumbled as he threw open the front door and stepped outside. Well, yeah, the brand girl said, her brows furrowed. It'd be fine if my mom didn't like bringing up how much she'd wanted only 4 kids every other day. Eric shoved his hands in his pockets and kept walking. His head hung downward so that he didn't have to meet Taryn's eyes. Not a big deal, really. It's not every other day. Taryn hurried her pace to keep up with him. Don't let her get to you. I don't. Doesn't seem like it. Just, can you not? Eric snapped. At Taryn's frown, he stopped and turned to look at her. I'm not trying to, look, can we not talk about this today? Okay. Taryn said, holding up her hands. Okay. Got it. They walked in silence for a while. Taryn, feeling slightly awkward, began to absent-mindedly twirl a strand of auburn hair around her finger. She let it fall back in place for a moment, before grabbing the tendril of hair nervously once again and continuing her fidgeting. They got to a bridge high above the ocean and leaned on its edge, enjoying the vast expanse of the dark blue sea beyond them. What a beautiful sight. Taryn took a deep breath and turned to look at her friend. He seemed far away, like his mind had left this earth and had settled in the clouds somewhere high above. I think you're all right. Taryn nudged him with her foot, making him jump slightly and grip the railing of the bridge. Where did that come from? He asked. Wasn't sure what you were thinking about, she replied thoughtfully. But I do think you're worried about nothing. Who says I'm worried? He blinked and furrowed his brows. Well, Taryn turned to face him, it's written all over your face. Don't know why, but come on, Eric. Sometimes I think you want to be permanently miserable. No one would ever want that. He looked away from her and stared at the ocean, trying to find a peaceful thought again. I know. So why'd you say it? You don't need to jump down my throat. Sorry. Eric sighed, wiping his face with his hands. Sorry, I'm not, I don't want to be miserable. But, gods, you know, it's been hard. He took a deep breath and sighed a little. It's been a year and a half. Taryn placed her hand on his arm. I know it'll probably never stop hurting completely. But, you're still here. Taryn, please. And I think he'd want you to stop focusing on what might have been, she continued as if he hadn't spoken. I know. Eric rubbed his eyes. I know all that. And I'm trying. You've been doing better, Taryn assured him. I'm really proud of you, she shot a smile at him. Eric kindly smiled at her in reply. You always know how to make me feel better. I know. I really do excel at it. Must be one of my many talents. She grinned and flipped her long hair over her shoulder, intentionally hitting Eric in the face. Oh yes, it is quite a talent. You should start traveling around the archipelago with Trader Johann and setting up little booths. He rolled his eyes, shooting an impish smile at her. She punched him on the shoulder, making him laugh. That's a brilliant idea. Pack your things, I'm going to parade you around as an example of just how good I am. Oh please, you don't need a model, he grinned and stepped away from her before she could poke him. But I had your outfit all picked out. And I was going to braid your hair too. She pouted in a realistic fashion, but the mischievous twinkle in her eye gave her away in an instant. How dare you insinuate that I, a strong, manly Viking man, would ever stoop so low as to wear braids? Eric flexed his muscles and shot a ridiculous smile at her, making her laugh harder. Besides, I don't think my hair is long enough. Tarin eyed his short blonde hair critically. Bet you anything I could braid it. You could pay me all the money on Burke and I still wouldn't let you braid it. You just watch, Mr. Larson. She poked his chest with her pointer finger. I will tackle you and force your hair into a braid when you least expect it. You wouldn't dare. And I'd put in little pink ribbons so you look even more ridiculous. Tarin crossed her arms and smirked at him. You'll have to catch me first. Eric took off in the opposite direction, running as fast as he could. Oh no you don't. Tarin bolted after him and chased him across the bridge and through a sunny field. She finally grabbed him and the two of them tumbled into the grass. Just one braid. Please. Pretty please. No, he shook his head, trying to untangle himself from her. They stood up and dusted themselves off, laughing uproariously. Eric glanced at the sky and noticed, with a pang of disappointment, that it was beginning to dim. We should go back, he said, resigning himself to what was waiting for him at home. Don't want them to have to go out looking for us. Tarin sighed deeply, her smile melting off her face. You're probably right. Despite their previous statements, neither of them moved a muscle. Eric looked over at Tarin, who was staring into the sky. She was so beautiful when she was contemplative. It made him want to know what was going on in that clever brain of hers. Well, he said through an exhale. Maybe one braid. But no bows. You're so generous. Tarin giggled. Eric shrugged. I wouldn't be a very good boyfriend if I weren't, would I? He leaned forward and kissed her on the cheek before hurrying off toward his house. His girlfriend watched him go, her smile still brightening her face. And then she turned and walked in the direction of her own house, glad that she'd succeeded in making him laugh. All right Horst, let me know if you need any more help. Thanks, hiccup. The door to the leather shop swinging shut behind him, the hooligan chief sauntered out into the busy square. People milled to and fro as usual, a few pausing to give him a cordial nod or pat on the arm. He paused to take a deep breath of new summer air and gaze longingly at the clear blue sky. How he longed for the days when his dragon would drag him out of bed at the crack of dawn and they'd fly for hours until only the call of nature could bring him down. Astrid had always insisted that food could be included as one of those important things to land for, but why would one take the time to sit at a table and eat when they literally had the world at their fingertips? But alas, more important things had taken a hold over his life, which wasn't altogether a bad thing. He loved his job, his family, his people. He wouldn't trade those treasured things for the world, but that didn't mean he didn't sometimes wish for a little free flight time. Odin knew he was only getting older and there was going to come a day he wouldn't be physically able to do those crazy stunts anymore. Hiccup shook out of his stupor at that depressing thought. He hoped that would still be a few decades away. Maybe half a century. That wasn't too much to ask, was it? Tittering to himself, Hiccup stepped further into the crowded street. He glanced around for a moment to locate his dragon, who was hopping from one roof to another as he followed his human. Toothless, you're going to bust a hole in someone's roof. Toothless growled indignantly and Hiccup snorted, fatty. Unfortunately the roof wasn't quite tall enough for Hiccup's head to be out of range for Toothless' tail. Half scales, half prosthetic slapped the chief upside the head, making him topple to the side and crash into a barrel. Ow! What was that for? Toothless jumped to the ground and made a series of grunting and croaking noises in Hiccup's face, making his hair blow backwards. Would you stop that, fish breath? Gah. Hiccup soon found himself on his back, gazing up at the sky. He vaguely registered a few laughs nearby. The chief huffed as he tried to sit up. Well, what do you want me to call you? You don't exactly eat roses, ow. Tooth get off. Only his head stuck out from one side of Toothless' rear, and his one leg and prosthetic stuck out from the other side. He squirmed and kicked, only making the occasional indent into the dirt. More laughter erupted and Hiccup desperately prayed the gods would send someone to intercede for him. Being squished into a haddock pancake in the center square under his dragon's big butt wasn't exactly on his repertoire. He could almost hear the story passing from tribe to tribe. He'd never live this down. Toothless. A familiar, particularly angelic voice sounded nearby. Hiccup stopped flailing for nearly a minute, panting. He looked up from under Toothless' back leg to see his quite beautiful wife gazing down at him with a mixed look between humor and concern. Hiccup, why? Long story. Can you just get him off of me? He's your dragon, can't you just control him? Control, you know how bad he is. He's like a child. He's considerably worse than a child. And you've raised two of those successfully. What's your point? Hiccup groaned in annoyance and crossed his arms. Or at least he would have if he could move them. Astrid snickered and stooped down to kiss his forehead. All right, big boy, let him up. I actually need him for something. Toothless instantly complied, his human gasping for air and quickly sitting up on his hands and knees. Hiccup glowered at Toothless just in time for his massive wet tongue to swipe up his face. Thanks. I wanted to drown from dragon drool today. Or get squished under big dragon butt. What a friend, he coughed, finally standing and scrubbing his face off with a handkerchief. It was effectively sopping when he was finished, making Toothless chortle further. Oh, go find Stormfly and pester her. I have stuff to do. Astrid snickered as Toothless trotted away with his head held high. Don't be so moody. I'm not. He's just playing. I think he finds it entertaining that even after all these years you're still the same clumsy doofus boy we both fell in love with. Astrid kissed his cheek gently, then recoiled with dragon spit on her lips. Gee, thanks. How comforting. Astrid rolled her eyes and steered him down the nearest alley between homes. Anyway, I came looking for you because I wanted to ask you something. She sighed and took a few moments to collect her thoughts. Have you noticed just how much of a bully Finn is? To the younger kids? Yes, Hiccup frowned. I've talked to him about it already a few times, but it doesn't seem to do much good. The kids are afraid of him. He stepped on an 8-year-old's hand the other day. What? Astrid nodded, raising her hands to create quotations. He claimed that she didn't move fast enough, but the child's mother said there's no excuse. Frankly, I agree with her. I know I'd be mad if some beefy teenager stomped on my little kid's hand. Hiccup rubbed his eyes and sighed. So they were playing in the dirt, I'm guessing, and he just barreled through. Sounds like it. Hiccup pulled his hand down his face and finally let it drop. All right, I'll talk to him. He's getting increasingly. He shook his head, unsure which word was the wisest. I know. He's at the forge, so I'd go there quickly. Astrid finished. I'm going to head home and start dinner. What time should we expect you? Hopefully 7. At Astrid's frown, he backpedaled. 6:45. 6. 6:30. 6:15 and we'll go for a late night flight. Deal. Hiccup kissed her chastely on the lips. You're amazing. I'll see you in a bit. Okay. Hiccup stepped back into the sun, blinking quickly to let his eyes readjust. Thankfully the forge wasn't a long walk, but he honestly wished it was further, simply to give himself more time to think about what to say. If he was honest, he was running out of things to say to his contentious son. He felt like he was trying to pull down a 7-foot wall of solid rock with his bare hands. He just wasn't getting anywhere and was only wearing himself out. He heard the clanging from inside the forge before he got close. Luckily he knew what to expect from being an apprentice at one time himself, so he steeled himself before walking inside. He wanted to laugh at his mental pun, but the sight of his son killed the humor instantly. Gobber noticed him walk in and gave him a small smile, then continued to stoke the fire. Finn continued pounding a sword blade on the anvil with quick fluid movements as if he was born for this job. Hiccup leaned against the countertop and watched his son intently, wishing he could have all the answers he needed. Benen's death a year and a half ago had taken Finn down a long, hard path. After nearly 2.5 weeks of staring at walls and skipping meals and all social life, Finn had suddenly bounded back into a busy life of hard work and rowdy fun as if nothing had ever happened. It was a strange thing to see someone so depressed and in pain, yet fighting so hard to not let it show. Just as the teenager pounded the sword into the right shape, Hiccup had watched his son pound himself into the right shape he wanted to be so he couldn't be broken again. He knew from experience that it was only a matter of time before he shattered. Getting the job at the forge and working with Gobber really had been a good choice though. Hiccup believed that his son really did enjoy working here. But Finn needed more than hard work to fill his days. He hung out a lot with his friends, had a steady girlfriend. But Hiccup knew his son was missing something, and the boy was just too stubborn to see it and accept it. Finn finally straightened and wiped his face with the back of his hand, scrutinizing the blade. He turned to plunge it into the barrel of water and his eyebrows furrowed at the sight of Hiccup watching behind him in silence. What? Gobber winced at Finn's aggressive tone, but stayed silent. Hiccup kept his face neutral, yet shrugged. Just watching. Finn rolled his eyes and plunged his hand into a barrel of dented weapons, pulling out an axe to sharpen. Well, unless I'm mistaken, you already know the trade well enough, afraid you won't be serving much purpose in here. Gobber turned toward the boy with a reprimand on his tongue, but Hiccup gave him a sharp glance. The elderly man clamped his mouth shut with a grunt, stiffly returning to his work. Hiccup forced his heart rate to slow. Finn was aggressive by nature, but that didn't mean he had to respond in likeness. Maybe not. Hiccup ducked under a hanging pot and slowly moseyed around the forge. Finn kept glancing up at him but didn't make any effort to speak. About the little girl. Gods, not this again. Mom already grilled me on this, I didn't step on her on purpose. Finn nearly shouted. Finn, do you really expect me to buy that? Hiccup turned to his son with crossed arms. You've been pushing little kids around long enough. They haven't done anything to you, they're children. And one of these days some father is going to give you a nice big shiner in that proud face of yours and I'm not going to say a thing about it. I wouldn't expect you to. Finn muttered with a dangerous undertone. Hiccup's heart gave a tug, which he swiftly ignored. Finn always had this implication that he didn't give 2 cents for Finn's well-being, which obviously wasn't true and didn't necessarily apply to this situation. But that's where every argument always headed. That he was a terrible father. Hiccup caught Gobber's eye from over Finn's shoulder. Instead of voicing his thoughts, he asked, what do you think about all the damage that's happened at Hawks and Mulch and Bucket's homes? Finn stopped sharpening the axe for a moment. He seemed dumbfounded that he'd been asked. Why are you asking me? Hiccup shrugged lightly. Because I value your opinion. You seemed interested in the meeting. Finn frowned. I wouldn't say interested. You were following along. Unless you were just nodding off. I don't know. I mean, what do you want me to say? You didn't exactly give out that much information to really form an opinion. Hiccup leaned against a table, chewing his lip. I don't believe it was a storm. Or dragons. Of course you wouldn't blame dragons, they are completely innocent. Gobber finally spoke up sternly, ignoring Hiccup's glare. Not what he meant. Okay, so what else could have done it? Finn paused with sudden excited look, then he whirled on his father with an excited look. Oh, I got it. It was trolls. Hiccup sighed, Finn. No, seriously, hear me out on this, trolls went in to steal people's socks. Mulch and Bucket and Horst all overheard the commotion going on in their houses, and the trolls magically stole everyone's memories. So nobody remembers that it was actually trolls. Finn snorted, except me, of course. You should make me chief sooner. Kids. Hiccup finally snapped. Finn's smile melted off his face and he stared incredulously. Kids. Yes, unruly kids. That's why I'm asking you. What? I didn't. No, I'm not accusing you of anything. You hang out with the teens all the time. What a concept, Dad. Because I'm a freaking teen. I'm asking if you have heard anything. Hiccup pinched the bridge of his nose, hoping there wasn't steam coming out his ears. No, I haven't. Finn shouted. This has just come up in the last week and suddenly you're asking me to be your little spy and infiltrate all my friends' lives. Do you want me to go around to each of them and ask them where they were on the nights of the crimes? Assuming that's what it is. No, I'm not doing that. I didn't ask you to. Hiccup bit out. I simply asked if you'd heard anything. You said no, so you can drop it. Topic dropped. So why are you still here? Hiccup clenched his jaw. This was their relationship. Constantly fighting. He'd always go in with a calm demeanor until Finn grated his nerves so much where he had no choice but to get angry. He was tired of being disrespected and insulted. He was tired of walking out the door because he didn't want to say something he didn't intend to. He was tired of giving his nearly 15-year-old son the victory of winning yet another argument with his old man. Your mother's making dinner for 6:15. Finn indifferently turned back to the sharpening wheel. I have other plans. Not anymore. Hiccup brushed past him. You can at least respect your mother by, for once, eating the food she made you. That alone would make her day. He didn't wait for his son's snarky response as he stepped back outside. The sun was finally setting now, casting an orange glow against the horizon. Hiccup trudged through the square, the ire in his chest building with every step. Shadows enveloped him when he passed between houses, each filled with happy families. It was selfish of him to think that every family was eating gumdrops and sweet rolls for dinner every night and basking in the love of each other. It was selfish of him to honestly think that nobody else in the world could know what this felt like. Without warning he turned and slammed his fist into a nearby barn. His knuckles ran into the structure so hard it sent an echo through its interior. He stewed in his anger for 2 more breaths before he forced himself to calm down. A year and a half of next to no smiles from either of his kids, and if they smiled it wasn't because of him. He'd tried so hard, so many times to make them happy. But both Adriana and Finn had locked their pains deep inside and built walls around themselves where it was hard to even approach their individual struggles anymore. Each of them needed love and attention desperately, but both continually shoved him away. They'd come to terms with Astrid over time at least, but he'd eventually succumbed to countless hours of working overtime because he couldn't stand the thought of becoming jealous that his children would talk to their mother and not him. He could only take so many slamming doors. In an hour, he'd have to go home for dinner and hope Finn showed up. He probably wouldn't. Astrid sorely missed him spending time with them for meals. Adriana would probably eat dinner with Brandine, seeing as it was still his first week on the island. He wouldn't bother her. She'd ignore him most of the meal anyway. In that case it would probably be one more dinner with just Astrid. He really didn't want to complain, he loved having the quiet time with her. But it was becoming increasingly more frequent. They weren't supposed to feel like empty nesters when their kids were only 15 and neither had moved out. Hiccup jumped out of his reverie when Toothless jumped down from the roof of the barn. The Night Fury sniffed his left hand and warbled. Yeah, punched another wall. Toothless snorted at him as if to say, you've really got to stop doing that. As if on cue, the dragon smacked Hiccup's thigh with his tail with finality. Hiccup gave him a short smile and slapped his tail away. He rested his palm against his dragon's nose and scratched his scales. They have to snap someday, but you can only pull a chain taut for so long. Toothless warbled in agreement and rubbed his nose against Hiccup's chest. Sighing heavily, Hiccup climbed into his saddle and strapped himself in. Okay bud, let's see what we can get done in an hour. Lifting off the ground vertically should have lifted his spirits. Feeling weightless in the air on his dragon's back should have been the remedy to his aching heart. But instead, the quiet of the skies only intensified the longing he had to be accepted by those he loved most. There weren't any distractions in the air. Chapter 3, False Smiles. Chapter text. There was nothing like acquiring a new job. The idea of working hard and building his muscles to the point of exhaustion had always been one of his favorite things. While most people loathed the idea of hard manual labor, Finn knew he was literally built to be a hard worker. The boy surveyed the damaged barn with distaste before stepping inside, stepping over a board and staring at a gaping hole in the ceiling. Something felt off about this barn in particular, but he couldn't recall what it could be, until he heard the splintering of wood coming from the boards above him. Finn stood entranced as cracks formed and the foundations of the building shook. He couldn't move no matter how hard he tried, his feet were glued to the ground. The barn's foundations trembled and heaved before finally, the roof caved in. He closed his eyes, waiting for the impact. Finn. A pair of hands shoved him from behind and he pitched forward into the snow. He landed hard on his belly and came up gasping. The boy whipped around and froze, staring in horror at the pile of rubble burying his best friend. No. Finn scrambled forward and began shoving planks off of the pile. No, no, no. Bennen. Bennen. Silence beneath the rubble. No, no, please. Somebody, help. Benen's trapped. Help. Nobody came. The teenager shoved and hauled, screamed and kicked for what seemed like hours until he finally managed to pull his elderly friend's body out of the rubble. Benen. Finn cried, tears forming in his eyes. Blood poured from the stomach wound where Benen had been impaled, the dark red liquid seeping into Finn's pants and staining the snow beneath them. Benen. Please Benen, don't leave me. The old man was barely breathing, staring up at Finn with calm blue eyes. Slowly he lifted a finger and pointed to Finn's chest. Fortis. Fearless Finn awoke with a wild gasp, nearly ramming his forehead into his bedside table. He sat up quickly, throwing aside his blankets and shakily checking his hands and searching for anything out of the ordinary. His eyes only met his clean bedroom, a pile of laundry on the floor across the room, and a quick check at his neck to find his necklace. Finn froze, checking his neck a second time. His necklace, the last gift he'd ever gotten from Benen, was gone. Panic. Terror. Chaos. What was once a clean bedroom quickly turned into a replica of the arena on a really bad day. Finn tore his bed and sheets apart, coming up short-handed. He was near ready to start truly panicking when he shoved his bed away from the wall and nearly cried with relief. The necklace was lying on the floor just beneath where his head rested on his bed. With trembling hands, Finn reattached his necklace and held it tightly in his fist. He sat against the wall and willed himself to calm down. As if having a nightmare, the nightmare wasn't bad enough, some spawn of Loki's minions had to allow for his precious necklace to be lost in the same night. Figures, the gods really must hate him. Finn wiped off his clammy forehead and shivered. He hadn't had that nightmare in a long time. He didn't know what the trigger was, but every few months it would happen, the same nightmare every time, but different variations. At first, the nightmare was exactly how it had happened. But as time wore on, he could almost forget what the real version was. His imagination had run wild over the last year and a half. The one time he'd woken up thinking he had blood on his hands was the last straw. Keeping these things to himself, he'd go to work day in and day out like a real man should. Some mornings he'd get to work before Gobber, other days before the sun itself. One time he'd actually run into his father out on patrol before dawn. That had been awkward. Finn snorted as he stood. Guess we have one thing in common. We're both workaholics. His door opened suddenly and he raised his eyebrow at his mother stepping inside. Did you say? Astrid trailed off, staring at his chaotic bedroom. Something. Yes or no? Just, talking to myself. Finn scratched his neck. You keep doing that and people are going to think you're crazy. Astrid smiled knowingly. What happened in here? Finn shoved his bed back into the corner and straightened the bedside table. Necklace fell under the bed. Ah. A feeling of gratefulness filled Finn's chest and he gave her an honest smile. He absolutely loved how he could explain himself in one simple phrase and she wouldn't press for details. Unlike someone else he knew. Well, I've got pancakes, bacon and eggs downstairs when you're ready. That's a lot. Finn commented as he remade his bed. What's the occasion? Astrid rested a hand on her hip. Is a mother in need of an occasion to dote on her son? Giggling at Finn's grin, she left the room and disappeared down the stairs. Finn quickly changed clothes and tramped down the stairs after her, quickly forgetting his nightmare and horrible morning wake-up call. His grin melted off his face when he saw that he wouldn't be having a quiet breakfast alone with Mom today. Adriana was sitting on the couch beside Brandine, who seemed to be making himself quite at home. Both of them had plates of food resting on their knees as they talked, Brandine's holding twice the amount as his sister. She had a delicate amount of food, probably because she thought she was so fat. Sitting at the head of the table sat his father, the official bane of his existence. If his mom hadn't made such a breakfast worthy of Stoic the Vast, then he might skip out and go to the Great Hall. But alas, he'd put up with his father for one meal if it meant keeping that smile on his mom's face. Ignoring the lovebirds on the other side of the room and his father's green gaze from behind him, Finn heaped his plate high and sat down at the farthest corner away from his dad. He watched his mother pile her plate high and frowned at his eggs when she sat beside Hiccup, taking his hand and having one of those telepathic conversations. Finn spared a short glance at his father and was a little surprised at how tired he looked, but he shoved another heaping of pancakes and bacon into his mouth and forced himself not to care. Finn, Gobber said you don't need to go into work until noon. Finn frowned at his fork. Why? Hiccup shrugged. Not as much work to do, I guess. There's always work to do. Tell me about it. Finn rolled his eyes. Not what I meant. Someday you'll long for the days when you didn't have to work so much. I know I do. His father rubbed his eyes with his fingers. Astrid gently held his hand when it plopped back onto the table. Finn opened his mouth to retort when the door opened and Snotlout Jorgensen popped his head in. Chief, by the look of his face, he didn't look happy. You might want to see this. Hiccup groaned low in his throat before standing and grabbing his jacket. Not even 8 in the morning. I know, we agreed not to bug you today, but it can't be helped. Snotlout muttered impatiently. Brandine twisted in his seat. Need any help? Snotlout scowled. Pipe down, newbie. We don't need your help. Finn almost snorted at how Brandine quickly deflated. He did, however, roll his eyes at his sister's pitying expression. Poor baby, how could the big mean Jorgensen speak to you so rudely? His father kissed his mom on the cheek before following Snotlout out the door. The remaining people in the house heard him call for Toothless just as the door closed. Astrid sighed quietly and rubbed her forehead while Adriana and Brandine sat quietly in the living room. Finn noisily scraped his fork across his plate, making the three jump simultaneously. Well, that was interesting. Was it? Astrid asked. Finn stood, carrying his plate to the wash basin. Jorgensen seemed a little flustered. That's Mr. Jorgensen to you, and he's always a little flustered. Astrid retorted. Brandine again turned in his seat to face them. Why? He's a Jorgensen. Finn remarked flatly. All the Jorgensens are moody. As opposed to Haddocks. Adriana mumbled. Astrid's eyes narrowed on the back of the girl's head. Adri, don't start already. The male Haddock twin turned toward the back door. And I do believe that is my cue. Finn slung his quiver across his back and grabbed his bow, then strapped his axe to his belt. I'm going to the woods. Astrid sighed. Okay. Finn closed the back door a little too loudly and took off into the woods. He hadn't a chance to have a good workout in a couple of days, so it was actually nice to not be needed at work quite yet. He used the long, 10-minute run as a warm-up until he finally arrived at his own personal shooting range. He was already hot and sweaty by the time he arrived, but he didn't mind a bit. Luckily there was a creek less than half a mile away, so he could always jump in before going to work later. For the next hour, Finn shot arrows and threw his axe into various trees, dummies, targets he'd made, and whatever else got in his way. It was rare for him to miss a target, but he didn't stop pushing himself to his limits to see how hard he could throw, how far he could shoot. It wasn't just a desire to be strong anymore, it was an obsession to become the strongest. Finn completed his workout with a jog to the creek, taking off his boots and washing his face when he arrived. He knew from experience that a too strenuous workout before working in the forge would make him sick. He didn't exactly feel like losing his lunch before lunch even came. Lying on his back, he stared up at the cloudy blue sky. The sun peeked out from between the treetops every time the wind rustled the leaves. It was fixing to be another beautiful day on Berk. If only he could enjoy it. He worked hard, he pushed himself to his limits every day, he went to bed feeling accomplished. But when he woke up every morning he felt very unsatisfied. It was a vicious cycle every day: get up, work hard, eat, sleep, get up, work hard, eat, sleep. He loved what he was doing, he loved working at the forge and hanging out with his friends. But he couldn't deny the empty feeling that he felt in his chest every morning when he woke up with too much new energy to sit still and let lonely thoughts creep in and strangle him. He wouldn't allow himself to feel. Feelings make a man weak. Feelings are just a weakness, period. A man needs to find his strengths and work hard to hone in on those strengths so he can better eliminate his weaknesses. That was the only way to survive in a world like this, where one has a whiny, innocent twin sister, hardcore mother that tries to keep everyone happy, and workaholic father that does nothing but gripe to you about his issues. A splash of cold water caught him by surprise and he jerked, shooting a glare towards his offender. His eyes narrowed playfully at his girlfriend, Helga in German. "What are you doing, lazy butt?" she asked with a wolfish grin. Finn stretched back out on the grass. "Just chilling, babe. You look hungry. And you look good enough to eat. What's your point?" Helga plopped herself beside him, sitting cross-legged, and flicked his ear. "PFT cannibal. MMMMMHM. Stop ogling me, you creeper." Helga slapped him in the ribs. Finn laughed. "Relax. Join me before I have to leave for work." Helga sighed dramatically. "If you insist." She twisted around and laid her head down on Finn's stomach, staring up at the sky. "So why are you angry?" Finn huffed. "Helga." "Yes." I was just thinking about my family." "You mean your dad?" "He's not all I think about, trust me. He's typically the last thing I think about." Helga rolled her eyes. "Well, at least you think about him. Now why'd you have to say that?" Finn grumbled. "Now I have to work hard to not do that." "Seriously, why do you have to be that way?" "What?" Helga rolled around to see his face. She scrutinized him carefully, like he was a cod to buy and she was weighing him to be sure he'd feed the whole family. "He does a lot for this village. He works just as hard as you do every day, probably harder because he's got more on his plate. The least you could do is give him respect where he deserves it. Not many men could lead a whole village." Finn rolled his eyes. "Not many men can properly raise children either." Helga huffed. "Finn." "What?" "You know it's true. All he does is work, and when he is home he just mopes around about how stressed he is. Do you want him to do that in front of the whole village?" Helga countered. "Honestly, Finn, don't you let your guard down when you're at home." "No." Finn snapped. "I don't." He abruptly sat up and began pulling one of his boots back on. "Why do you care anyway?" "Because you're my boyfriend, and you have next to no relationship with your father. I can't imagine despising my mom or dad that much. And they're worried about him, besides." Finn's tugging slowed to a stop. "Your parents are worried about my dad." "Why?" Helga glared at him. "Because they've been friends since they were children, Finn. Everyone on this island sees how torn up he is about you and Adriana, and you refuse to see it." Finn shrugged nonchalantly. "So what, you're sympathizing with my dad now? I can only feel sorry for you for so long. You're the only one who won't make a change. I've witnessed that man bend over backwards for you countless times to try to make amends and you won't have it. No. Every time he approaches you he's calm and collected, and he's always upset when he leaves. You're the one being aggressive and making things difficult. Did you come all the way out here to lecture me?" Finn growled. "Because I don't need it, Helga." "So what?" Helga asked quietly. The change in volume threw him off so much he had to focus on her next words. "Are you going to shove me away too for trying to help?" Finn gritted his teeth and stared forward in the creek. He felt her move closer until she was sitting right beside him. "You can't win every argument. You're my boyfriend, my best friend. We have been for years. He felt her fingers on his cheek and finally allowed her to turn his face back to face hers. I'm bringing this up because I care. I want you to be happy. Finn felt himself gradually relax, though his stomach still churned angrily. Instead of voicing his thoughts and probably starting another argument, he forced himself to look calm. He kissed her gently once, then more firmly a second time, allowing her to relax against him. He almost hated making her feel like she'd won the argument because she really hadn't. But he didn't want to leave angry with her. Sometimes kissing her was the only way to get her to shut up. He leaned in closer, pushing his fingers through her hair and pulling her closer. His tongue barely brushed against her lips before she pulled back with a wild grin, and he suddenly found his other boot thrown at his face. Your feet stink, Haddock. Helga promptly announced before standing and sashaying toward the trees. Take a bath. Finn watched her walk away as he tugged on his other boot and grabbed his things. I'll only take a bath if you join me. Helga whipped around with a horrified blush on her cheeks. Finn. The teenager grinned as he stood and gestured toward the creek. What? We've got a creek next. He raised a hand toward the woods and the treetops. We've got full coverage out. Finn rubbed his head where the rather large pinecone had landed. Put a ring on my finger and I'll consider it. Helga sassed. Finn snorted, yup. Marriage was the last thing on his mind. He didn't plan to get married anytime soon whatsoever. He grabbed his weapons and trotted after her. I suppose I'll just have to postpone all the fun. Fine by me. Invitations always opt out. Gods, stop slapping me, woman. In some ways, the past year and a half had been awful to Eric. He only had his mother, who seemed to despise his very existence. He also had to live under the same roof as Nicholas and his wife, both of whom went out of their way to make him miserable. To this very day he still hadn't held a civil conversation with his childhood best friend. If he ever spoke to Adriana, it was usually short with a touch of sarcasm or cynicism, from both parties. He couldn't deny that he missed quite a few things from times gone by. But there were some good things that he'd grown to love and appreciate, particularly with relationships. First off, he'd built a great friendship with Taryn. They'd been dating for a few months now. After his father had died, he'd been morose and solemn for countless weeks. He remembered overhearing whispers from passers-by on his growing depressions. It wasn't until one day in the great hall that Taryn sat beside him for dinner that he slowly but surely came back to the land of the living. Grief had buried in him so deeply that he didn't realize how much he really needed a friend to help him get through it. They started hanging out as friends in the great hall on a regular basis. Meals turned into lengthy conversations about everything and nothing. She'd visit him at Horst's leather shop to have the straps fixed on her saddle more times than was healthy for the material. Taryn was good for him. She was kind, smart, funny, but timid. She didn't speak up in big groups and wasn't very confident in herself, especially around the more popular kids. He found that he didn't mind though. It wasn't good to be overly confident either. He'd never had a good or bad relationship with his 21-year-old sister Out, either. They were simply siblings. They loved each other, but didn't spend a whole lot of time together. But after their father died, Out seemed to take her little brother under her wing. Eric blocked her out like everyone else at first, but she was the first one to break through his shell. Out of everyone in the family, he would have thought it to be Magnus. But it had been Out who'd gotten him back on his feet. Now they spent time with each other on an almost regular basis. Out had married her husband, Kurt, 2 years ago, which had been a surprise to him at first. Out was the complete opposite of Magnus. While Magnus would spend at least half an hour in the washroom fixing her hair and smoothing out her skirts, their mother had to nearly force Out into wearing a skirt. She'd always been running around with the boys as a little girl, the Larsens' wild child, they called her. In a strange way, Out sometimes reminded him of Finn, always running around doing something, always loud and obnoxious, kind of abrasive, but capable of compassion and kindness. Well, Eric wasn't quite sure if Finn was capable of compassion and kindness. He was the kind of kid who smashed butterflies because they made too much wind as they fluttered by. He wasn't exactly known for his sweet spirit. Between Taryn and Out, Eric found his life tolerable. He worked from sunup to sundown almost every day. He'd spend the evenings with either Taryn at the Great Hall or her family's house, or out if his mother didn't demand that he stay home. Sometimes Charger would literally charge into the leather shop to drag him out for a flight. It was simple and comfortable and easy, he had no worries. Currently, Eric was putting the finishing touches on a new saddle for one of Burke's newest dragon riders. The girl's father had put the order in 2 days prior and he'd asked for it to be finished in time for her 12th birthday. At first Eric had been a little peeved at the short notice, but he found he liked the challenge. The end product was looking pretty nice besides. Horst poked his head into Eric's shop. "I'll be heading out soon. You about done?" "Yeah, I'll be done shortly," Eric replied. "All right. Be sure to close the back door good and tight. We don't want anyone breaking in." Eric cocked an eyebrow at his mentor. There'd probably be no point in locking the door if someone was to break in. "All right, Mr. Smartypants." Horst chuckled as he left the room. "Be sure to douse the lamps." "Okay." The blonde teen heard Horst grab his bags and leave out the front door, whistling as he walked to his home a few blocks away. Horst was another person he was thankful for, calm in demeanor, yet stern when necessary. Horst had also played a huge part in getting him back on his feet. Of course, Eric wouldn't admit it to the man's face, but he almost looked up to the older man as an uncle. It just didn't seem right to label him as a mere family friend or just his mentor. Eric chewed his lip as he worked, sewing the last loops into the leather. Finally, he sewed the girl's name into the leather just under the handlebars with extra fancy swirls. He figured most guys would laugh at his talent for flowery penmanship, but he didn't care. He used it for little girls' saddles and that was about it. A knock sounded at the front doorway and Eric was on his feet without thinking. He hustled into the front room as a musical female voice called out, "Horst." Eric stopped in his tracks in surprise. Adriana stood in the doorway with a tall brunette teenager whom Eric had never met before. Seeing her alone stole Eric's breath away for reasons he didn't want to count. But seeing her here in his workshop with a guy, well, if he cared at all then the idea wouldn't be that preposterous. She was a pretty teenage girl and surely she had male friends. Not that he cared at all. "Oh," Adriana remarked in a surprised, yet flat tone. "I." She stole a nervous glance at the teenage boy beside her, who merely raised an eyebrow in confusion. Eric attempted a smile. It felt like a grimace. "Do you need something?" "Ah, well, it's fine, I was just looking for Horst. He just left for the day." Eric shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. "What did you need?" Adriana took a step back toward the door, clearly uncomfortable. He held back a huff. Even when he wasn't trying to be rude, she had to run away. "It's okay, we'll just come back, Tom." "Nani, what's the big deal?" The boy spoke up with raised eyebrows. "Since he works here." "Yeah, since I work here." Eric echoed quietly, scuffing his boot against a table leg. Adriana narrowed his eyes at him with a scowl. She took a moment to stew before turning to the tall boy. "I'm being rude." "Brandine, this is Eric." "Eric, Brandine." She didn't sound very sorry for being rude. Brandine stepped closer into the shop with a wide grin and hand extended. "Ah, so you're the famous Eric." Eric shook his hand firmly but not without calmly replying, "More like infamous, but I suppose I should be thankful for the recognition anyway." Adriana pursed her lips from the doorway. Eric ignored the quizzical look the other boy was giving him. "So I take it one of you has some work for me to do." Brandine walked to the doorway and grabbed a saddle sitting just outside. He tossed it to Eric, who instantly took note of the damage. "Yikes." Eric held it up in front of him to better see the acid damage. "I'm just going to go out on a limb here." "Changewing?" Brandine snickered. "Yeah, he got a little feisty on a flight earlier today." One question Eric mused in honest curiosity. "How did you manage to get a saddle burn that big directly behind your dragon's head without getting burned yourself?" The brunette shrugged nonchalantly. "Couldn't tell ya." "The real question is," Adriana cut in coldly, "can you fix it? Or should we pay Horst to do it?" Brandine looked at her in surprise. "Nani?" Eric met her eye and didn't think twice. "No, I'll do it, free of charge. What? The other teens asked in surprise. And Eric walked to a nearby closet and dug around for nearly a minute. He re-emerged with another saddle in his hands, which he tossed to Brandine. I'll let you use that in the meantime. Adriana shook her head. This isn't your store, are you even allowed to do that? As for pay, I make my own calls with my own work. And the saddle is procedure. Shouldn't you know these things, princess? Eric turned on his heel to set the ruined saddle on an empty bench. He could almost hear Adriana gritting her teeth as he wrote a note for Horst. Don't call me, princess. Eric turned back to her with a sharp glare. Then don't insult me on my own turf. You can treat me like dirt anytime you want, but you could have spared him the drama. Eric jerked his chin toward Brandine, who was chewing his finger nervously. Oh, get off your high horse, Eric, like you care about other people, Adriana began. Brandine clapped his hands loudly. So? He turned to Eric with a wide grin. When should I pick it up? Eric breathed slowly through his nose to calm the burning ire in his chest. When do you want to pick it up? Well, I don't want to keep you from other jobs you have to do. Brandine, really, work is work. Unless it's Snoggletalk, I won't be that busy for a while. Eric shrugged. When do you want to pick it up? The brunette looked at Adriana in askance before making a decision. Thursday. Works for me. Cool, thanks man. Brandine shook his hand again and stepped toward the doorway, sensing Adriana's impatience. Anytime. Eric leaned against the doorway as they walked out. Have a good night, don't stay up too late, yada yada. Adriana frowned over her shoulder. Are you my dad, now? Brandine grabbed her sleeve and dragged her away from the shop. See you Thursday, Eric. Nice to meet you. You too, Brandine. Have fun on Burke. Eric watched with narrowed eyes as the duo walked away. While you can. Eric turned back into the store with a huff, closing the door and quickly dousing the lamps. He snatched his coat and satchel off his desk chair and tromped out the back door, carefully locking it. A squawk interrupted his musings. He looked up to give a small smile at Charger, who jumped down from the roof and bent his big green head for a scratch. Hey there, big guy. Eric scratched his dragon's chin, smirking when the Nada began pounding one leg on the ground. Come on, we're late. He hoisted himself into the saddle and urged Charger to take off. He was thankful that Charger had waited for him today. Out's house was on the other side of the village, and the last time he'd gone over there, it had rained. He was lucky that he didn't catch a cold. The 15-minute walk was reduced to a 2-minute flight. The smell of roasting chicken, potatoes and homemade rolls wafted from the open windows. Eric didn't realize how hungry he was. As Charger landed and he slid to the ground, Eric wondered just how his tomboy sister also became one of the family's best cooks. Magnus and Lara had admittedly good cooking skills, but Aud knocked them out of the water every time. His sister-in-law couldn't cook a potato, let alone cut one. That was another thing they did as a way to bond, cooking. It was strange when he'd first visited Kurt and Aud's house and she'd invited him to help cook dinner. The first few times were awkward because he felt like he was doing a woman's job, but over time he discovered that he enjoyed it. He remembered taking the trip with the chief, Finn, and the council a few years ago, and he and Finn had both made food a couple times for the men. They'd all been surprised at the boy's talents. Those were the good days when he'd been friends with Adriana and Finn. His father and Benin were still alive, the chief still smiled and didn't work himself to the bone. He had a relationship with his kids. Nobody had come away from that Snoggletalk unscathed, it seemed. Eric marched inside and called a greeting to Aud and Kurt while hanging up his coat and satchel. He glanced into a nearby mirror and rubbed a few dirt marks off his face with his sleeve. Adriana came to mind again and he scowled, wondering why in the world he cared if she saw him with soot on his face or not. He'd been working, so what did it matter? What did it matter what she thought anyway? He didn't care. You stare at that mirror any harder, it's going to shatter. Eric smiled at his sister when she walked into the kitchen. Just testing out my poker face. Aud smiled knowingly while she checked the potatoes and rolls baking in the oven. She glanced at Eric washing his hands from the wash basin on the other side of the room, the scowl still on his face. Kurt marched down the stairs noisily, slapping Eric on the back as he walked past. "Hey Squirt." "Hey Eric," remarked flatly. Out rolled her eyes and faced him. "Oh, all right, what's the problem?" "Problem?" Eric asked as he dried his hands on a towel. He didn't look at her. "Who said I have a problem?" "Your face did." Kurt snorted. "That sounded similar to a your mom joke, but dumber." "Shut up, Kurt." "Yeah, shut up, Kurt." Eric echoed with a smirk. Kurt crossed his arms. "You dare insult your host?" "Hey." Eric held up his hands. "The hostess insulted the host first. And every good man knows that the hostess's word is law." Out chortled. "Yeah, so shut up, Kurt." "Hey." Eric and Out cracked up. Kurt grabbed a nearby pillow off the couch and threw it at Eric, who easily dodged. He twisted the wet hand towel in his hand and gave Kurt a warning glance. Kurt gasped, "No, don't you Eric, you little come here." "Hey hey hey." Out shouted, trying not to laugh as they tore through the house, jumping over the couches and up the stairs. "Don't break anything or I'll slap you both with wet towels." A loud crash and uproarious laughter was the only reply. Eric quickly found himself in a headlock and dragged down the stairs backwards, which was a difficult feat. The victim had no choice but to trust his captor that he wouldn't be dropped backwards down the stairs to come crashing to his demise. Or at the very least into a heap of blonde embarrassment. Either way, it didn't sound appealing. G. "Kurt, can't breathe, ha. Kurt, come on, let the kid go. Mama would have my hide if I delivered him dead." Kurt pouted and released the teen, who quickly stood up with a red face. Eric hurried into the kitchen to help Out grab a few cups that were just too high for her reach. He tried to keep his tone light, but he couldn't resist replying, "She'd probably rejoice, actually." Out rolled her eyes. "Eric, come on, she's not that bad. You don't have to live with her anymore. Mom isn't as kind as she used to be, I admit it." Out pulled the rolls out of the oven, filling the room with a wonderful smell that reminded Eric of Snoggletog. He frowned, if only Snoggletog held great memories anymore. "Remember that she still loves you." "HMPH," Eric replied noncommittally. Eric Kurt rested his arm on Out's and shook his head gently. Out blew her blonde bangs out of her eyes but nodded. Her little brother came here to spend time with them and get away from the family stress. Of course he wouldn't want to talk about it. "Do you want to get the chicken off the fire?" "Yes'm." Eric nearly jumped out of his seat, making the couple snort. They watched him in silence while Kurt set the rest of the table. They knew Eric to be a hard worker and he was gradually becoming more social with the kids, but it had been a tough road for him the past few years. Out wanted nothing more than to see his dimpled smile as often as it was when their father was alive and he'd spent every waking moment with his best friend. She missed his happy smile. The trio was soon sitting around the table, joking or dodging the occasional piece of chicken or potato. The Larson matriarch really would have their hides if she'd been present to witness such an atrocity at the dinner table, but Out had always been a rebel. Kurt and Eric only followed suit. So Eric stabbed a potato and studied it like it was a work of art. "When are you guys having babies?" Kurt promptly choked on his chicken and slapped a hand over his mouth. Out smirked and clapped him on the back a few times. "Well, we're not sure. I mean, whenever, I guess." "Why?" Eric shrugged, still staring at his potato. "Because babies are cool." "Don't you mean loud? Smelly?" Kurt asked. Out slapped his arm. "Babies are not smelly. They can be. That doesn't mean they're smelly all the time, Kurt. I think you'd make a good dad, Kurt." Kurt paused in surprise and chuckled nervously. "Thanks, Eric. I don't know anything about babies. I think I've got some stupid dad jokes hidden somewhere up my sleeve, but that's about it. Not very helpful when they're just wrinkly, pink balls of mush." "Kurt." "What?" They just take practice." Eric waved his hand. "I remember the first kid Michaela had. I almost dropped him because he was so light. Yeah, he was tiny. But you know what else takes practice? Out shoved her plate aside and stared at Eric beadily until he made eye contact. Relationships of the dating sort. Ah, here we go, the juicy stuff. Kurt leaned forward excitedly. Eric sighed. Oh man. How's Taryn? Out began, steepling her fingers in front of her lips. Eric sighed again but played along. She's fine. She likes working with Grandma Ingerman with pottery and weaving. It's calm and she gets to talk to a lot of ladies about womanly stuff, I guess. Whatever you women folk talk about. I second that. Kurt nodded. Out smiled knowingly. What else does she do? Eric shrugged. Makes curtains or homemade soaps or candles, gardening, sewing. Lots of stuff, really. Sounds like she's a housewife in the making. Out's eyes twinkled. MMMMMHM. Kurt's eyebrows danced up and down so much that Eric began to blush. Oh shut up. The couple cracked up when the teenager buried his red face in his hands. A thrill of excitement ran up Out's spine when she saw the dimples on his cheeks. She'll make a good wife someday. Out patted his hand. I'm just not so sure she's the girl for you. Eric lifted his head with a confused expression. I mean, I'm not exactly looking to get married anytime soon yet, but, ouch. No, I mean, she's a great girl, she is. Out watched the smile melt off her brother's face. I just feel like there's someone who balances you better. Like. Out paused, trying to choose her words carefully. Eric's eyes narrowed at her silence until he finally sat back in his chair with a thump. Seriously. Don't go there. It's been more than a year. Out held out her hands in a placating manner. I'm not saying that things have been easy for either of you, or that breaks can be mended in a short time. Things take time, I understand. Adriana hates me, Out. Eric forced out, staring at the table when he couldn't meet her eyes any longer. She's downright mean, even when I'm trying to be civil. You should drop some flowers off at her house one day. Kurt said while checking his teeth in a spoon. Out slapped his hand down, making Eric smile a little. It might make her day. Eric snorted. She'd probably burn them at the first chance. Not that I'd actually take you up on that suggestion. Why not? Because I have a girlfriend, Kurt. Eric remarked shortly. You don't give flowers to your ex-best friend when you have a girlfriend. Kurt opened and closed his mouth like a fish. Well, when you're not dating then. Are you saying that you want me to dump your sister? No. Well, no. Kurt. What? He asked incredulously. No, I don't want that, but I have to say I agree with Out, not because she's the hostess and the hostess's word is law, mind you. You and Taryn have a lot of good qualities together, but the puzzle pieces just don't quite fit. He held Eric's gaze nervously. Does that make sense? Eric pursed his lips to the side before dropping his eyes to the floor. Yeah. Perfect sense. You know, the one good thing going for me is being shot down, but that's okay. It doesn't matter or anything. Eric, that's not how it began. No, you know what? No. It's fine. Eric huffed, standing and grabbing plates to take to the kitchen. We're not even saying that it's a bad relationship, Eric. Out stood with him. She grabbed his hand to make him look at her. Teal eyes locked on blue. I just don't want you to get hurt if it doesn't work out. Eric gently pulled his hand away and grabbed a handful of plates. I'm always getting hurt, Out. He swiftly took the dishes to the sink before she could comment, effectively closing the conversation. Out sat beside her husband with a sigh. Kurt brushed her bangs out of her eyes, giving her a gentle, loving smile. He'll be okay, he whispered. She nodded and glanced over her shoulder at Eric furiously scrubbing a plate. I just want to see him smile again. Really smile. Even Taryn hasn't given him that. Kurt squeezed her hand. He's only 16. He's got plenty of mistakes to make before he finds his way. Out tittered. He's had enough trial and error. I don't know when I got so protective of him. Your dad's death took a huge toll on him. And he's doing better. Kurt fingered the ring on her finger. I'm proud of my sister for stepping up and being his friend. That was all he needed, someone around his age to talk to. But I just hope that at least their friendship will last even if the relationship doesn't. I think it will. Aud smiled and kissed his forehead. Trial and error, right? Kurt grinned. Trial and error. Hey, am I going to clean up your mess all by myself? Eric called from the kitchen. Aud turned to him fully. No, actually, I think we were talking about going upstairs and making some. Don't say it. Eric and Kurt both shouted loudly, the teenager covering his ears with wet, soapy hands. Hey, you brought up babies, not me. She slapped Kurt's shoulder. Why are you so upset about this? Kurt blinked. I'm feeling empathetic for my young friend over there. Aud smirked, twisting a finger through his dark coarse hair. You should be thinking more of me than Eric. Oh gods, please spare me or I will walk out. Hiccup. Hiccup 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 hithrotic oop. What? Hiccup stood up from his seat in the great hall, nearly tripping on Toothless Tail when Tough Nut forcefully bowled him over. The two men went sprawling head over heels, multiple council members or villagers crying out in surprise and jumping to their aid. The teenagers cackled with delight as Gobber yanked the chief back to his feet. Ow! Gods, Tough, what is? Svala. Tough Nut grappled with a bench for a moment before whacking his head on the table. More teenage laughter in the background erupted, but he swiftly ignored them, accepting Snotlout's hand. Svala, baby. It's coming. Oh. Hiccup nodded, slinging his arm around his friend's shoulders and steered him toward the doors. Then why in Odin's good graces are you here talking to me? Shouldn't you be, oh I don't know, with her? Tough Nut jerked out of his grasp and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him violently. I don't know what to do. Man. Hiccup slapped his friend's hands away urgently. He could almost feel a blush rising to his cheeks at how hard the teenagers were laughing now. He was at least a little pleased to hear Finn's laughter mixed in with the rest of the group. The thought made him want to be a little more expressive to see how his son would react. Tough, you don't do anything. Hiccup threw his hands up. You just hold her hand, slap a wet cloth on her head and let her do all the work. Yoo-hoo. The teenagers erupted as many of the adults looked over at them with confused expressions. Hiccup glanced over in time to see Finn shake his head and take a big swig of his drink. He seriously hoped that was cider or they'd be having a father-to-son chit-chat later on. Again. He turned back into Tough Nut's rambling, told me to just hold her hand and slap a wet cloth on her forehead. That's the most insensitive thing you've ever said in your life. Probably not. Astrid would be kicking your butt so hard right now. Probably. Hiccup gestured to Snotlout to take Tough's other side and together they frog-marched their friend toward the doors. Now, this is your first kid and after all this time, I think the Great Hall entertaining the teenagers is probably the last place you want to be. Why yeah probably. I'm just freaking terrified. Tough Nut yanked free of their arms and shoved the doors open. I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, all this time and it's been so long, but I honestly don't know what I'm doing. Tough Snotlout squeezed his shoulder. Trust me man, no matter how much advice we could give you that we probably haven't already said, you still won't feel prepared. They don't come with a manual. Hiccup added. Snotlout frowned. You basically got to watch us make all the mistakes before you have your own. You should have the perfect child. That comment struck a chord in Hiccup's chest. He didn't know why it bothered him so much. It wasn't directed toward him at all and Snotlout hadn't meant to be insensitive, he tended to be the most insensitive when he wasn't thinking too hard anyway. That's why Hiccup had learned early on as a kid to take Snotlout's word with a grain of salt. But watch everyone else make all the mistakes. Perfect child. Snotlout and Heather didn't seem to have made very many mistakes. Granted, their daughter Inga still struggled with those sudden episodes that no one besides Binnen could explain. Their twin boys were very much little Snotlouts running rampant around the village. Then there was Fishlegs and Rough Nut, they didn't seem to have very many issues in their family either. His family, few. He and Astrid had struggled since day one. How many valuable life lessons had their friends learned due to his own mistakes? How many things had they done differently than he had to have a different outcome? It wasn't a very comforting thought to consider. They were nearly to the healer's house by now. A sharp cry of pain erupted from the house and Tough Nut gasped. Svalar. He took off at a run and the remaining men chuckled. I'm happy for him. Snotlout grinned. Me too. Snotlout raised an eyebrow at him. You don't sound very thrilled. Hiccup snorted. I'll be glittering with joy once she's here. It's a girl. Hiccup winked and slid into a sitting position beside Toothless, who'd just arrived with a codtail sticking out of his mouth. Now we wait. The men sat until darkness fell and Svalar's muted cries echoed through the silent village. Hiccup judged it to be around 10:30 when her cries were replaced by the wails of a newborn. Toothless jumped up and down excitedly, bounding toward the Morrow's home as fast as he could. Hiccup laughed. Calm down, ya big lug, that's not our baby to keep. Toothless crooned sadly. Nope. Our time for babies is done, I'm afraid. Snotlout snorted. Until Finn fathers an heir, that is. Or Adriana has a kid. Either way. Hiccup shook his head. Let it not be so for many years to come. The door opened and Mara stepped outside with a bright smile. It's a girl. Ha. Told you. Hiccup smirked. How? I still don't get it. Every dragon master has his secrets. Maybe one day I'll show them all to you. Hiccup laughed and stepped into the house. Oh great, next you'll be offering me a position at your side to unlock all the dragon's mysteries and find every lost species together or something. You know, if I didn't have a village to run, Snotlout, I just might take you up on that offer. I wasn't offering anything. That was hypothetically what you'd be offering me if you didn't have a village to run. Which I definitely wouldn't take, by the way. A whole adventure with just you and me and our dragons to keep us from killing each other. Just kill me now. Snotlout. Heather emerged from one of the rooms and he jerked. Babe. What are you doing here? Heather rolled her eyes. I was helping Svalar deliver the baby. I told you this. Snotlout stared at her blankly. Yeah. You told me this. Heather huffed, waving them through the door. You're too loud besides. Come say hi. Svalar sat up in the bed looking exhausted and Tough Nut sat beside her with an arm wrapped around her shoulders, but both of them were absolutely glowing. Svalar held her new precious baby to her chest, swaddled in a pink blanket and tracing her finger around her little face. Hiccup didn't realize he was grinning until Tough Nut and Svalar both looked up at them. Tough Nut pointed down at the baby and nearly squealed, my baby. Guys, that's my baby. Everyone laughed out loud as Svalar kissed his cheek. Under normal circumstances, nobody would ever witness Tough Nut cry. Hiccup couldn't honestly remember if and when he'd seen Tough Nut cry. But his friend's grey eyes very clearly brimmed with tears and not a single person judged him. After 3 miscarriages and years of being told that they couldn't have children, the Thorstons had finally been blessed with the god's most precious gift to mankind. What's her name? Hiccup asked softly. Svalar beamed. Ava. Ava Grace. Snotlout breathed a laugh. She's tiny. Eh. Tough Nut smirked at Hiccup. We've seen tinier babies. A sharp ping stabbed Hiccup's heart for the second time that night, and again he was at a loss. Tough Nut hadn't meant anything by it, so why was he getting irrationally offended? He was being beyond ridiculous. He forced a smile onto his face, which became easier when little Ava stretched a fist outside of her pink bundle and squeaked in discomfort. The adults chuckled lightly before Mara stepped forward. Well, I think it's time everyone headed out. Svalar and Ava need their beauty sleep. What, I don't need my beauty sleep? Tough Nut asked loudly, causing Ava to whimper. His eyes widened and he gently patted her head. Sorry, baby. Hiccup and Snotlout snickered. Good night, guys. Congratulations. The Thorstons bid them goodbye and Mara saw them out the door. Toothless warbled outside, trying to nose his way through, but Hiccup blocked him. No buddy, you'll have to wait a few more weeks. Don't give me that look, she's too small for your slobbers. Snotlout snorted, taking Heather's. All right, we're going home. He slapped Hiccup's shoulder and walked off. Good night, Snotlout. Heather. Hiccup watched them go for a moment before sliding into his saddle. All right, but let's go home. Either the flight home took a lot less time than usual or Hiccup wasn't paying attention. Either way, he saw two dark shapes in the window of the dragon pen at the Haddock home. And he had a very bad feeling about those shapes, especially taking the changeling just outside the pen into account. Hiccup walked in without knocking, his heart clenching as he saw his daughter and Brandine laughing and joking as they walked in together. He should have been thankful that Adriana was perfectly fine, but he was more concerned with the fact that she'd had no good reason for being out this late. She looked around and suddenly jumped. Dad. I didn't see you there, she exclaimed, the smile melting off her face. Hiccup tensed. Inside, Adriana. The Haddock girl crossed her arms. What? Why? Because it's almost 11 at night. Hiccup said in a very controlled tone. So say good night to Brandine. I'll take care of Lily. Adriana opened her mouth to speak, but Brandine swiftly cut her off. Anna, it's fine. I'll see you tomorrow. Whose side are you on? The girl asked in a rather snippy tone. His, if I have to choose. Brandine shrugged. He's the one with all the cards. No, he really isn't. Hiccup's voice elevated in volume. Adria. I'm going. Gods. Adriana snarled, stomping up to the side door closest to the house. See you tomorrow, Brandine, she said in a falsely cheerful voice before turning on her heel and walking through it, slamming it behind her. There was a very awkward silence. Brandine eyed Hiccup apprehensively and was slightly alarmed at the cross expression on the hooligan chief's usually relaxed features. I guess I could have gotten her back sooner. Could have. Should have. Brandine corrected himself. I don't care if you go out on a flight. But don't keep her out this late again. Hiccup said curtly before turning around and, forgetting all about Lily, leaving the pen without another word. Hiccup walked into the main room in stony silence. Adriana was still there, wrestling with a stubborn boot that didn't seem to want to come off. She had only just managed to yank it off her foot when she saw her father standing there, surveying her with a scowl on his face. What? Care to explain why you were out until 11 with a boy? Hiccup asked, crossing his arms. Don't make it sound so scandalous. Adriana rolled her eyes. Nothing happened. I'm not saying I thought something had. Hiccup forced his voice to remain steady. But your mom and I would have been really worried if we'd gotten back a bit earlier and you weren't here. What kind of person do you think I am? Adriana stood up, her temper clearly rising. What, you honestly believed I don't know, sleep with him if he takes me on enough late-night flights? Adriana. Hiccup snapped. This isn't about that. Isn't it? His daughter retorted. Well, you don't have to worry, Dad. I won't be going on any more late-night flights. It's not as if I accidentally let time get away from me, no, it was clearly pure defiance this time. That's enough. Hiccup roared. Adriana stopped speaking, looking stunned. Must you always jump to the most ridiculous conclusions? All I was going to say was don't do it again. So say it. Spare me the lecture. You could do with a few good lectures if you're going to talk to me like that. Hiccup shouted. I won't tolerate it. I am your father. So act like one. Adriana shouted back. I'm going to bed. Unless I need permission to sleep from the high and mighty king of the Haddocks. Fine. Get to bed. It's the first good idea you've had all day. Hiccup grandly gestured to the stairs. Adriana immediately bolted to her room and slammed her door without as much as a good night. Hiccup muttered darkly under his breath. Then, quite suddenly, he stomped outside, found the nearest tree, and slammed his fist into it. The familiar pain exploded in his knuckles, but this time he felt that he liked it. Punishing himself for terrible parenting, for being an abject failure at everything lately, felt good. Almost relaxing in a twisted way. Again and again he punched the tree until there were bloody fist prints dripping from its bark. Hiccup. For one horrifying moment, Hiccup thought it was Adriana who had spoken, but a split second later, he realized that, regardless of her current feelings toward him, she wouldn't have addressed him by his first name. He turned and met the cool blue eyes of his wife. She stared at him, horror-struck at the sight of her husband's red face, which was screwed up in rage. Her eyes moved to the blood pouring from his fists, coating the tree in front of him. The breath seemed to be sucked right out of Hiccup's lungs. He froze in place, his eyes unable to meet his wife's now that he knew that hers were latched onto him, taking in the sheer amount of blood dripping from his fists. "What are you?" Astrid gasped. "Your hands, what did you?" "I." To Hiccup's immense irritation, he could feel tears welling in his eyes. "Just." Here Astrid said in the same sort of gentle tone she used with the twins when they were upset, "Let's wrap that up." Hiccup silently allowed himself to be steered into the house. He and Astrid were silent as Astrid cleaned and wrapped up his battered hands. She didn't speak again until they had been sitting in silence on the couch for several minutes. Then Astrid spoke, making her husband jump. "You've got to stop doing this," she said calmly. "Well, what else am I supposed to do with these feelings of inadequacy?" Astrid suggested. At Hiccup's stunned silence, she continued. "You don't usually lose it at the kids, Hiccup." "What happened?" "Addie came home late." "You know?" "No." Astrid shook her head. "What upset you enough that you lashed out at her?" A sinking feeling entered Hiccup's gut. Nothing," he said unconvincingly. "Is it Ava?" Astrid pressed. "I don't want to talk about it." "Well, that's tough," said Astrid firmly, "because we are." She paused, waiting for Hiccup to retort, but he said nothing. "Brought back a lot of memories, didn't it?" The corners of her mouth turned up in a small smile. "Ava looks a lot like Audrey did when she was that little. I can tell you noticed." "What exactly do you want me to say?" Hiccup asked darkly. "That I'm the worst person in the world for being jealous of the Thorstons instead of happy for them. Because it would be true. I had a feeling." Astrid sighed. "Fresh start, opportunity to protect their baby in ways we never could. Makes me feel like I've got the younger siblings I always wanted when I was little," said Hiccup with a scowl. "I get why people can't stand them now. They learn from your example and you make all the mistakes." "Yeah, I guess," Astrid said dismissively. "But resenting them for opportunities they got that you didn't won't solve anything. It's how I feel." Hiccup mumbled. "I know. I understand." Astrid put an arm around him and kissed his cheek. "Hard not to feel that way, but..." She paused almost apprehensively. Does Ava being such a miracle baby?" "Don't say it, Astrid. Remind you of something else. If you're talking about Addie. You know who I'm talking about." Astrid pressed. Hiccup stared at her, his eyes wide. We agreed we wouldn't talk about that. That was almost 12 years ago." Astrid shook her head. "We were young, we were stupid to make that agreement. But we should talk about it. I can tell it still affects." Anger surged in Hiccup's chest. "What? You want to?" After all these years, he suddenly stood up and started to pace. "What is there to say about it?" "Hiccup, what happened with Darin wasn't anyone's fault," Astrid said shakily. "And the situations with Svala and me are different." "Different how?" Hiccup snapped. "Tasha said there wouldn't be any more kids for you and me, and Mara said the same for Svala after the second miscarriage. So you wish Tuff and Svala had lost little Ava because that would have made sense?" Astrid asked in a flat tone. "No." Hiccup shouted. "Why would you ask that?" "I don't know. I never know with you because I was always afraid to bring him up." Astrid ventured cautiously. "What is there to say?" Hiccup suddenly bellowed. "He's dead, Astrid. Tasha said it was likely and you told me not to get my hopes up, but I was stupid and I did, and then he died just like she said he would." Hiccup. "You think seeing a couple defeat the odds in a way we couldn't doesn't affect me? You think I don't think about this every single day, wonder if he'd hate me as much as Finn and Addie do now, wonder what kind of ways I'd have ruined his life too?" Hiccup wiped angry tears out of his eyes, irritated at himself for crying during his tirade. Even if he hadn't died, he probably would have gone through just as many horrors as the twins. I can't do this, Astrid. I can't. He collapsed on the couch and put his head in his hands. Astrid stared at him, her mouth slightly agape at the angry rant she'd just witnessed. It was the most Hiccup had ever said about the subject in 12 years. She wasn't sure how to react or what to say. Slowly, she scooted herself closer to him and put her arms around him. For a moment, he was rigid, breathing heavily, and then he slowly lowered his head onto her shoulder. I miss him too, she whispered, kissing the top of his head. And not a day goes by that I don't think about him. But we've got 2 amazing kids, Hiccup. That's more than so many people have. Let's honor his memory by making sure his brother and sister are raised right. Hiccup nodded. Yeah, let's. He sniffled and wiped his face with his hand. Big day tomorrow. As usual, he mumbled. Have to get to bed. He rose without as much as a good night and climbed the staircase. Astrid stared at the bedroom door after he had shut it, feeling a rush of very conflicting emotions. On the one hand, it broke her heart to see her husband as depressed as he had been over the last few months. She ached for him, hoping each day that things wouldn't get worse. But on the other, perhaps she was being a bit selfish, but in all of his despair, Hiccup didn't seem to pay much attention to her. The last time they'd had this long of a dry spell was when they'd been on the cusp of divorce, but that was the farthest thing on Astrid's mind. He'd needed her then and she'd been aloof. Now she was determined to be there for him no matter what. But even so, 2.5 months. Shaking her head, she stood up and ascended the staircase. Hiccup would probably be curled up and pretending to be asleep when she entered. She didn't want to let this bother her. He was in pain. He needed support. But she had needs too. She looked over at the doors to the twins' bedrooms. She could hear the soft snoring from Finn's room. He was usually dead to the world by 10. Adriana had a light on. She was probably reading. She'd recently discovered an excellent book about 2 witches and their very complicated friendship. She'd cried all the way through the ending but still read it again. Astrid could never understand why people wanted to subject themselves to reading material that made them cry, but then again, perhaps it was a bit like her propensity to make the same arguments with her stubborn children despite the fact that it did nothing but frustrate her more. She looked back at her bedroom door. No sounds came from within the room and she knew Hiccup must be lying down and attempting to sleep now. Like Adriana, Hiccup seemed to be drawn to things that made him emotional. Perhaps that was one of those things she'd never understand about him. But, she reminded herself as she pushed open the door, perhaps she wasn't supposed to understand it at all. What she knew for sure was that she was going to have to be the voice of optimism from now until things got better. And she hoped more than anything else that things would. Then again, they always had. And there was no reason to believe that they wouldn't again. Chapter 4, The Gift. Chapter text. Astrid always loved the dim light shining through the windows on summer mornings. The warm air wafting through the room meant that she didn't have to light any candles to see what she was doing or to warm up the house before breakfast. There seemed to be infinite reasons to love summer, not least of which was the fact that today happened to be very special. The Haddock matriarch resisted the urge to fling the covers from her body and leap out of bed with gusto. Her husband, who was still asleep, wasn't the sort of person who appreciated this behavior regardless of the season or the particular day. She had learned this the hard way on the first morning of their marriage. The first of many difficult lessons she would learn in the next nearly 16 years. But today wasn't the day to think about difficult lessons. They could do that any time. Today was the day to celebrate the best and worst day of her life, of Hiccup's life. The day everything had flipped upside down for the young couple, the day their horizons expanded and their lives became much richer than either of them could imagine. In other words, it was Finn and Adriana's birthday. Astrid couldn't believe it had already been 15 years since had received the shocking news that the baby she'd been preparing for since the beginning of her marriage was actually 2 babies. 15 years since she had first held her son and watched Hiccup desperately and successfully revive her daughter. In her entire life, she had never again felt the rush of love she'd had when everything had calmed down and she was finally holding the babies she had carried since just after she had gotten married. And now those babies had gained over 100 pounds each, had learned to walk and talk, had outgrown the need for diapers, thank Thor, had gotten their own dragons, and had experienced some of life's greatest joys and its most crushing tragedies. But that was all part of growing up, something both Finn and Adriana did way too fast for comfort. Knowing that Finn would be more open to waking up at dawn, Astrid tapped on his bedroom door before entering. Her son was sprawled on the bed, his soft snoring quite audible in the silence. Astrid smiled at the memory of Stoic making some of the same grunting snores when he would spend the night after a particularly rough day watching the twins. How very like his grandfather her Finn was becoming. Morning, she said softly, kneeling next to her son as his eyes fluttered open. Happy birthday. MMMMF. Finn groaned before a large yawn. Morning, Mom. Astrid kissed his forehead. Anything in particular you want for breakfast? Not really. Finn replied as he sat up and stretched. Your cooking is always delicious. Laying on the sugar a bit early today, aren't you? Astrid grinned as her son rolled his eyes. Nah, I'm just a lucky guy to have a mom and beautiful and talented as you are. Finn said quite seriously. All right. Astrid sat down in a nearby chair and crossed her arms. What do you want to ask me? Ask you. Finn got out of bed and ran his fingers through his matted, messy red locks. Do I need a reason to compliment my own mother? Finn. All right. Finn laughed and held up his arms in mock surrender. I guess there is one thing. Yes. Can I come a bit late to the party? Finn asked quickly as if he'd been bursting to say this since he'd awakened. A few of the guys and I are racing our dragons, and that always takes a few hours once we get going. Is that so? Astrid sighed deeply. Come on, Mom. Anna would probably love to have her own party for once, even if it's just for an hour or two. Finn pleaded, his blue eyes widening to resemble those of terrible terrors begging for table scraps. And it's my birthday, he added hopefully. Oh. Astrid grinned at the adorable expression on Finn's face. All right. But don't miss it. Your dad won't like that. No, I imagine not, said Finn, carefully concealing his scowl at the mention of his father. You're the best, most beautiful, most amazing mom ever. The teenager quickly hugged his mother before patting her on the back. But I need to change clothes, so. Of course. Astrid stood up and kissed Finn's forehead again. I'll make pancakes. You're the best. Finn called as his mother left the room. Don't you forget it. Astrid called back just before she shut the door. It had happened again. Adriana should have known it wouldn't last. 2 months without a single incident, now that was a record. Perhaps it had been the excitement of Brandine's impending arrival or the anticipation of Svala and Tough Nut's baby that had kept her mind out of its usual circular thoughts and feelings. She supposed that, on some level, she may never know. But the all-too-familiar fear awakened her far too early for comfort, and, yet again, she found herself lying in bed, covered in her own sweat, with her heart pounding in her ears. 11.5 years ago. It had been 11.5 years ago, she thought irritably as she slowly rose and made a face at the damp strands of hair slowly coming unstuck from her pillow. How could she still feel like she was 3 years old at the mercy of a woman who was nothing but dust by now? Why did she live in Adriana's memory, constantly popping out at her as if she was some kind of sick, recurring practical joke? Adriana was not 3 years old anymore. It seemed ridiculous to have to remind herself of that fact as she rolled off her bed and reached for a towel. She would need a bath. She always needed a bath after nights like this. After grabbing her towel and her clothes for the day, she tiptoed down the stairs and was relieved not to find anyone on the way down. She quickly slipped into the washroom and shut the door as carefully as she could. She swiftly locked it and hurried to the window to whistle for her dragon. Lily came bounding forward as if she'd been waiting for Adriana's call. Hey girl, Adriana cooed as she affectionately patted Lily on the nose. Another rough night. Will you give me a hand? Lily knew the routine by heart now. Her human would slide the wall sideways to admit her, draw the curtains, put water into the bathtub, and then Lily would heat the water. After that, Adriana would peel off her sweaty pajamas and settle into the bath, always making the same kind of groaning sound when her body was immersed in the hot water. Today was no exception, but Lily had the funny feeling it was a special day. The extra bounce in her human's mother's step was a clear indicator of something. Thank you, Lily. Adriana breathed as she slowly got to work rubbing soap on her body. You're a lifesaver. Lily made a crooning noise and plopped down next to her human. Adriana smiled at her as she now scrubbed her hair with the flowery substance she preferred. Lily loved that scent and dearly missed it now that Adriana had stopped wearing hair flowers. But she supposed that her human wasn't the cute little girl she had once plucked off the ground and attempted to carry away. Growing up was a positive development, not a negative one. As Adriana soaked in the tub, she heard someone descend the staircase next to the washroom. The step thunk was a clear indicator of who was now awake and moving around. Hiccup was walking toward the kitchen and speaking cheerfully to someone, though his words were too muffled to hear. The Haddock girl sank lower into the bath water. She didn't want to deal with him today, especially not after the night she'd had. If she had to be honest with herself, Adriana knew Hiccup wasn't to blame for her problems. At least, not in a direct way. He was indirectly to blame for her green eyes, clumsiness, and sarcastic tone that made people who had known her father as a teenager snicker at how alike they sounded. She even, according to Gobber, could pull off a lot of the same facial expressions. Being a miniature female, Hiccup was becoming a rather irksome reputation on its own, even if she and her father didn't have other issues. You know, people can only be pushed so far. You know that as well as anyone. But if you keep this up, if you keep hanging on to this, you're going to end up alone and unloved. That's what happens when you let things like this consume you. Every minute you hang on to this, you push away people who love you. One day, there won't be anyone left. Don't let that happen. It seemed like those words had a tendency to echo in her head as if her brain were a giant, empty chamber every time Hiccup entered her thoughts. As she bathed, she ran through the age-old argument in her head. Was she hanging on to what had happened? Adriana bit her lip and furrowed her brow as she concentrated on this conundrum, her bath forgotten. She didn't ask for the nightmares or the occasional panic attacks. That wasn't dwelling onto her ordeal, that was being unceremoniously thrown back into it at random. But would those episodes really keep her from her own father's love? Her family's love? She hugged her knees. Her father was an amazing man and she, well, she was nothing. How could she ask for the love of a man who had, by his own admission, every intention of revoking it if she failed to stop this from affecting her? How could she prove that she was worthy of the life he had saved when she was scarcely out of the womb? As she finally remembered that she was still in the bathtub and the water was starting to get cold, she quickly got up and threw on her clothes. She poured the water out as best she could and, toweling her long hair, finally decided to enter the main room and face her family. "Morning, birthday girl." Astrid chirped the moment she came into view. Adriana started. It was her birthday today. She'd completely forgotten. How in the world had she managed that? Her eyebrows shot upward for a second before she put on the most genuine smile she could muster. "Hi," she said in a breathy voice. Hiccup was sitting on the other end of the table, his expression unreadable as she walked over. She nodded once to him before sitting down in front of a plate piled with pancakes and smothered in fruit. "Thanks, Mom," she said as cheerfully as she could. "They look good." She looked around the room. "Where's Finn?" "Outhouse," Hiccup replied, using his fork to pick at his own plate of pancakes. "Are you doing anything special with the girls? Or with Brandine?" His tone was casual, but Adriana could detect a hint of impatience, as if he wanted her to interrupt him mid-sentence and assure him that she wouldn't be pushing boundaries with her sole male friend today. "Brandine and I are going to hang out before the party," Adriana said, keeping her voice as casual and steady as she could. "That okay?" "Yeah." Hiccup smiled at her, but she could see the concern in his gaze. "I have returned." Finn burst through the door, still flinging water off of his newly washed hands. "What did I miss?" "Your sister's here." Astrid gestured to Adriana. "If I were you, I'd avoid the outhouse for a while," he said to her as he sat down. "It's not pleasant." Adriana made a face. "You're disgusting." "I can live with that." Finn grinned. "So are you going to sulk like you did last birthday?" "No." Adriana huffed, slightly annoyed at his tone. "I'm going to spend the day with my friends." "Ah. Sulking again?" Finn placed an enormous bite of pancakes in his mouth. Oshoria Haba, he added, spraying the table with crumbs. Finn, for Thor's sake, don't eat with your mouth full. Astrid snapped irritably at her impolite son. The haddock boy swallowed so fast, his eyes began to water. Then how am I supposed to eat? Hiccup and Adriana both snorted with laughter as Astrid's face reddened slightly. You know what I meant, she said, keeping down her own guffaws. The family finally burst into fits of giggles. Astrid shook her head. Her slip of the tongue had already done more to cheer her husband and children up than anything else in a very long time. She was glad for it, even if it did mean that she'd probably be reminded of it for weeks to come. Still laughing, Hiccup stood up and sauntered over to the door. He could have sworn he'd heard scratching on it, likely caused by a hapless terrible terror who was trying to get in and hadn't thought to use the window, an all too common occurrence. All right, little guy, come on Gar. Hiccup leaped backward with a scream, his hand clutching his heart. A second later, the family could see the reason for the haddock patriarch's surprise. A tall, curvy woman with very messy blonde hair had jumped out at him from the bushes next to the door. Her shrill, raucous laughter echoed around the house. Your face, she squealed, stamping her feet with mirth. That was amazing. Hiccup's heart was still pounding in his ears, but he forced his voice to remain calm. Kamikaze, what in the name of sanity? His sentence was interrupted when Kamikaze threw her arms around him and crushed him in a hug. He gasped for breath after she had let him go and pushed past him to see the rest of the family. Look at you, she shrieked when she saw Astrid. You're prettier than he said you'd be. Who said what now? Astrid fixed her husband with a suspicious glance. Oh Asgard, no, it's not anything like that. Kamikaze shouted. He's all yours, much too skinny for my taste anyway. Astrid Hiccup wheezed, gesturing to their surprise guest, meet Kamikaze, chief of the bog burglars. I told you about her. Bet he said I was a nutter. Kamikaze punched Astrid's arm, making her wince. They all say that. Kamikaze the crazy, at your service, Mrs. Haddock. And you too, she abruptly turned to the twins. Oh, he gets cuter every day, this one, she pinched Finn's cheek in her long fingers. And you, she bustled over to Adriana and grabbed her face in her hands. Much too pretty. How is she this pretty when she looks more like you than Astrid, she called to Hiccup, who still seemed to be recovering from the shock. Are you calling my husband ugly? Astrid asked in a warning tone. No. Kamikaze cheerfully exclaimed. I'm saying his face looks better on a girl. But that's no surprise. Most things do. I'm inclined to agree with you. Hiccup said, shooting a grin at his startled daughter. Nice to see you again. What brings you here? Do I need a reason to visit my second favorite chief and his beautiful family? Kamikaze proceeded to wallop Hiccup on the arm, causing him to emit a pained squeak. It's so lovely to see you again. And don't think I don't know what day it is, she added as she pulled out two slightly squished packages from her rather sizable pockets. I made Trader Johann tell me under threat of torture. He was unwilling to tell you. Hiccup raised an eyebrow. No, I was just playing around. Kamikaze replied. Jumpy man, he was. Seemed eager to leave. I'm not surprised. Astrid muttered. Open it, she squealed to Finn, who was having some issues tearing the papers off his oddly shaped gift. Out fell a funny-looking object with strings attached to a handle and going over a thicker area with a hole in the middle. Finn raised an eyebrow at the gift. I don't know what it is, Kamikaze explained most unhelpfully, but look, she plucked a string. A musical note emanated from it. You can play music on it. I've been calling it a string thing. You could stand to learn a new skill. Hiccup said cheerfully as Finn plucked his gift a few times, looking quite intrigued. Open yours. Kamikaze commanded, turning her attention to Adriana. I made some of it myself. Adriana tore the wrapping off of a book with no title. She opened it up and looked slightly disappointed to find no words in it. Oh, don't look like that. Kamikaze chirped. It's for your own stories. She promptly threw a handful of charcoal sticks at the girl with gusto. See. Now you can tell stories and they'll last forever. Or you can write your own stories about that spaceman. Seems like a silly idea, writing about characters that aren't yours, but I bet you could make up so many of your own. Everyone forgets they all aren't yours. Adriana thought wryly that no one would ever read a story that mixed established characters with someone else's new characters unless that someone was exceptionally talented. She immediately began to consider the kinds of characters she'd add to the spaceman's vast universe. Or perhaps, she thought with a start, she could write a fictionalized account of the adventures of people she knew. "Thank you, Kamikaze," she said with a smile, giving the woman a one-armed hug. "It was nothing." Kamikaze shouted back, making the family wince at the sudden noise. "Now why don't you?" She punched Hiccup's other shoulder. "Show me around." "Why not show her around, Finn?" Hiccup nudged his son in the ribs. "Since you keep staring at her." Finn, whose bright blue eyes had been fixed upon Kamikaze, bounded over and held the door open for her. "I've got a little time to kill." Kamikaze grinned in amusement at the teenage boy and walked through the door. As Finn started to go through it behind her, she turned around so suddenly, the boy nearly bounced off her sizable bosom. "I'll be seeing you later, Mr. Hooligan Chief," she shrieked before turning around and running to her dragon, who was growing playfully at Tornado just outside. "Come on, blockhead," she called to the Nadder, whose head was oddly square-shaped now that Hiccup got a decent look at it from outside the open door. Both dragons took off. Adriana stood at the doorway watching them for a moment before Lily nudged her back. She turned to her parents. "Can I go?" she asked, giving them a pleading stare. "Brandine's expecting me soon." "Your party is at 2. Astrid reminded her. "Don't be late. And stop by home so you can pick up your bra, I'll be done adjusting it by then." Adriana's face went a deep shade of scarlet. "Mom. Your dad knows you're a girl," Astrid said dismissively. "Go on." Adriana hightailed it out of there so fast, she resembled a green and brown blur. Hiccup began to clear the breakfast dishes as Astrid got out a sewing kit and one of Adriana's bras. "Do you have to do that at the table?" he asked, feeling rather awkward. "Why does she keep needing adjustments?" Astrid asked no one in particular. "I wore this bra at 15 and it wasn't tight at all." Astrid. Hiccup's face was beginning to resemble his daughter's moments ago. "I'm right here." Astrid sighed, resigning herself to her work. How in the world did Adriana continue to outgrow her old shirts and bras at such an alarming rate? Horfison women were curvy, definitely, but they were also fairly slender. It was almost as if. "This is your fault," Astrid said suddenly. Hiccup raised an eyebrow at her. What?" Astrid suddenly got up and strode over to her husband's helmet. "I've been staring at this while fixing her clothes for weeks, how did I not see it?" "See what?" "You." Astrid poked him in the chest. "You've been wearing half a breastplate on your head for years. This is all you. What does my helmet have to do with oh?" Hiccup took a step back, his face finally succumbing to a scarlet hue. "Well, technically this is my mother's fault. How convenient that she can't do this herself." Astrid mumbled. "Well, I'd offer, but I really doubt Addie would appreciate that." Hiccup shrugged. "I'll be going to the Great Hall to oversee decorations. That'll take forever. And I'll make the cake after I'm done here," Astrid said, focusing on her sewing again. "But don't think I won't make you start mending some of our daughter's shirts. I'll be happy to do it." Hiccup kissed his wife on the cheek before walking out of the door and hurrying toward the village, Toothless at his heels. Eric hated beads. No, he despised them. They were tiny holes that he had to loop through stubborn strings that didn't want to cooperate, and on top of that, he had to pay close attention so he kept the color patterns correct. He'd learned the hard way that messing one bead up and discovering the error an hour later was pure torture. He liked to tell himself that the job made the day go faster, but that was a lie. It was so tedious, the day dragged on. Another saddle for a little girl nearly finished and he was ready for lunch. As if on cue, his stomach rumbled impatiently and he let out a huff of frustration. Quickly counting the strung multicolored beads one more time, he noted that the saddle wouldn't be finished for at least another 10 minutes. "Whatcha doing?" Eric jumped, scattering beads across his desk. He slammed his hands against the end of the string, cutting off the bead's escape. He huffed and sent a glare up to his girlfriend, who smiled down at him cheekily. I was trying to finish this chore of a request very soon, but now it looks like it'll take me about. Oh, Eric swiped his finger along the less beaded string. Another half hour. Sorry. Taryn remarked sheepishly. Surely you're exaggerating though, it couldn't take that. Oh, so now you're an expert on beading. I happen to enjoy it very much, thank you. Taryn rested her hands on her hips. Grandma Ingerman asks me to do lots of beading for purses and... That's great, babe. Eric rubbed his eyes. But I can't go anywhere until I finish this saddle, so if you don't mind waiting. Taryn glanced at the beads scattered across his desk and littering the floor around their feet. She smiled wide and pulled up a stool next beside his. Eric raised an eyebrow. What are you doing? I'm starving, Larson. I'll help you finish, then we can get some grub. You don't have to do that. I know, but I want to. You should go enjoy your break in the sun before the ladies call you back. Are you really denying my help? Yes. No. A deep voice cleared behind them and Eric ducked his head. Taryn twisted on her stool to see Horst poking his head in from the main room. As adorable as you two are, I think Mr. Larson can finish that saddle in silence, yes. Sorry. Should I leave? I don't care if you help, but you can goof off on his break. Yes, sir. The duo scrambled to pick up the beads scattered on the floor and began to put them back on the string in earnest. Eric was actually very thankful for her help because it made the job seem like less of a chore, with her shoulder brushing against his or her fingertips occasionally poking him in the ribs. He jerked away and loudly whispered at her to stop. She grinned and poked him again. Eric rolled his eyes, still whispering. You're so immature. Sure, work. I'm working. You're not supposed to be talking. You talked first. Gah. Eric clamped his mouth shut after his sharp outburst. Taryn's shoulder shook with suppressed laughter. God's woman, stop poking me. Horst's voice echoed from the front, do I need to come back there? Silence reigned once more. Taryn sneaked a glance at Eric, which he ignored, trying not to grin. The dimples on his face were hard to ignore. Taryn leaned over and quickly pecked his cheek before stringing the last few beads in her hand. She watched Eric catch his bottom lip between his teeth as he also strung the last few beads and tied a knot. Phew, finally. Eric smiled at her. Thanks for helping. He jerked away from her probing fingers, nearly falling off his stool. Taryn jumped off her stool, grabbed her bag, and ran out the front door. Oh, it's on. Eric snagged his satchel and tore after her, ignoring Horst's huffs of disapproval. Taryn stole a glance over her shoulder and yelped in a panic when she saw Eric gaining on her. She tried to run faster, but Eric finally caught her elbow, stopping them and yanking her to a stop. No, no, no. I'm sorry, she grappled with his hands, trying to stifle her laughter. Eric fought back his grin, feigning frustration. You don't sound very sorry. I'm sorry. Taryn's mock apology was lost in her uproarious laughter that echoed across the square, catching the attention of many villagers in the square. A few snickered at the teenagers having an epic tickle battle, rolling in the dust and not caring that they were getting filthy. Taryn finally screeched through her struggles, okay, stop. Eric finally let up, standing and breathing hard with a wild grin on his face. He hadn't laughed that hard in a long time. It felt good. That's what happens when you poke a man too many times. You can't win a tickle battle, not with a man who has 4 nephews. Yeah, Taryn sat up gasping, her face red and auburn braid in shambles. Eric held out a hand and pulled her to her feet. She snickered, patting his tunic, you look terrible now. Eric spoke before thinking. And you look like a hot mess. His eyes widened and a blush rose up his face almost instantly. Taryn giggled. A hot mess, huh? Ugh. Eric buried his face in his hands. That's not what I meant. His head snapped up. Not that it's not true. I mean, wait. Larson, do you need a shovel to help you dig that hole deeper? Eric sighed in defeat. Shut up. Taryn laughed, grabbing his sleeve. Come on, I'm starving. You're starving. I'm a growing man and it's noon and you're starving. Shut up, Larson. Let's find some shade. Break's nearly half over already. Eric tittered and jogged after her towards a shady barn just outside the square. He sighed contentedly, wishing he had more days like this. He felt light and carefree, despite the few glances they were receiving from adults. He wanted to keep this light-headed feeling forever and bid all his troubles goodbye. But alas, life simply didn't work that way. That's impossible. Why? They would have to float. So it would just get waterlogged and sink to the bottom. Well, fries float. That's because they are fried in oil. Oil floats on water. Brandine ignored the laughter of the Great Hall, completely caught up in the discussion he was having with the birthday girl herself. He and Adriana had been talking ever since she had entered the room and, as usual, he was getting the upper hand. Exactly, so if fries float in oil and oil floats on water, then fries are going to float on water. Adriana continued, her plate of food forgotten in the ferocity of their verbal sparring. Nani, we're not talking about fries, we're talking about bread dough. Brandine reminded her, rolling his eyes. Well, I'm just telling you, baking has nothing to do with how they're cooked. They boil the water in a big vat and the water cooks the dough while it floats. Adriana gestured to the vat in question as she spoke. That would be poaching. You don't poach dough, they're not called poachelles, they're bagels, they're baked, get it? Brandine held up a bagel and ripped it in half to show her its exact consistency for the sake of their conversation. If it's not boiled in water, it's just a roll with a hole. Adriana said stubbornly, her eyes never leaving his. Oh yeah? Well, think about this, if you drop dough into a lake, even if it's a boiling lake, it's just going to sink to the bottom. Now a donut, yes, that would stay buoyant for maybe an hour but only because it's been fried in oil. Brandine picked up a donut and tossed it at Adriana. The haddock girl opened her mouth to reply when she became suddenly aware of the hush that had fallen over her fellow Burkians. The large double doors had opened and all sets of eyes had turned to the entrance of the Great Hall. Smiles formed on everyone's face as they saw Finn walk in, the birthday boy finally arriving to his own party. A chorus of happy birthday, and hey, it's the birthday boy, rang out through the hall. Adriana cracked a small smile, sitting across from Brandine and enjoying the bagel about which they had been discussing for the last several minutes. Hiccup and Astrid stood near the huge cake that Astrid had slaved over for nearly the whole day, sighing in relief as their son finally arrived to his birthday party. Sure, it was hours later than they had expected him, but at least he was there. Astrid was the first to walk over, smiling at her son and welcoming him to his own celebration. Happy birthday, son, she said cheerfully. Finn fixed an unfocused and far too big grin on her. Thanks mom. His facial expression didn't change, but he didn't move either. Astrid stood in front of him, concern beginning to creep up on her as she wondered if her son was all right. She moved to touch him, but Finn simply started to walk into the party, his head high and still grinning. Adriana's small smile quickly faded, along with everyone else, and was replaced by a thin line on her lips. She set her bagel down and suddenly felt a bit concerned as she watched her brother awkwardly lean as he walked. It took her a minute to figure out what was going on, but once she figured it out, her eyes widened and her face heated with pure embarrassment. She looked up at Brandine just in time to see his lips descend into a frown. When she looked around the room, Finn's was the only smile there. No one spoke as they watched the haddock boy walk around the room, looking at all there was to see. The purple and green decorations everywhere, the stacks of fruity drinks, the huge cake in the center of the room, just waltzing around, never losing his smile. By now, Astrid had watched her son walk almost halfway around the room, slightly slur, and never stop smiling. Her face grew from concerned, to slightly shocked, to disappointed, to slightly angry, to embarrassed. She was doubtful that she had ever had so many emotions rush through her at once while staring at her child. She glanced at the sea of faces, all frowning, including her husband. What a mess, to be standing here, watching her only son come to his shared birthday party, tipsy and not in any shape to be here. She almost wished he hadn't shown up. She quietly walked over to her husband, who was looking embarrassed himself. This is unacceptable, she whispered as Finn had walked around almost the whole room. There is no way that he is staying here like this. He's already embarrassed us, himself, and probably Adri. On instinct, Hiccup glanced to his daughter, who was still sitting across from Brandine, and could clearly see the look of embarrassment on her face as she watched her brother finally stop and smile serenely at everyone. He saw Brandine's frown deepen, and as he looked around at the other faces, Hiccup's embarrassment only grew. Gobber stood near the side, disappointment etched in his features. In fact, most of the faces showed disappointment or disapproval. Hiccup felt his embarrassment color his cheeks as he saw the few teens and younger children who found Finn funny as he clunked around, only to be hushed by their parents. He could see Kamikaze in the corner of the room, her blue eyes flashing with anger, which was just one of the many emotions Hiccup was feeling at the moment. "We need to take him home. Now." After whispering it to his wife, she nodded and they both walked over to their son, hooking their arms under his and beginning to walk out the door, finally making it to the door and slipping out of the party. They marched their son home, their faces both full of a mix of emotions as they moved. Finn slurred something incomprehensible and tried to break their grips, yet he never broke his smile and his head tilted over a bit. As Hiccup helped his wife drag their son home, he could no longer deny Finn's state when he could see the pungent odor coming from his son that he could identify from anywhere. It was the sharp, sweet smell of mead, and Finn had clearly had more than enough to intoxicate him. He only thanked the gods Finn wasn't completely wasted. As Astrid caught sight of the Haddock household, her look of anger took over and her nose burned from her son's evidence of drinking. She couldn't believe her only son had the nerve to drink mead on such a special day and show up inebriated to his own birthday party, embarrass himself and his whole family. It was unacceptable, and when he woke up and got over the massive headache he would surely have, she would most definitely be having a talk with him. Hiccup opened the door first, bringing his son inside and marching with his wife up the stairs until they reached his room and let go of Finn's arms. Hiccup opened his mouth to speak, but Astrid shook her head and let her son sit on his bed, finally breaking his smile. "What's the matter?" Mom. "Dad." Astrid sighed and looked down at her son, who was still slurring. "Finn, you're going to stay here and sleep this off while we go back and try to enjoy the rest of your sister's party." She was clearly not happy and turned and walked out, Finn giving her a slightly crooked wave. Hiccup looked at his son and nodded, as if agreeing with Astrid, and turned to walk out, but not before saying to his red-headed boy, "We are very disappointed in you." He quickly walked down the stairs and through the front door as he followed his wife back to the hall, feeling humiliated as he walked back into the celebration. Luckily, it seemed everyone else was back to chattering happily and enjoying themselves, and even Adriana seemed to be back to normal, brandishing her bagel around and laughing as she talked with Brandine. It seemed everything was back to the way it was, but Hiccup knew that under their smiling faces that they were all wondering about what was going through Finn's mind to make him decide to show up to his own party underage and drunk. He'd like to know that himself, honestly, but as he saw his wife Astrid try to calm down, so did he, trying to enjoy the rest of the celebration for their daughter and the rest of the guests that were there. "Well, I can't say that it was my best birthday," Adriana said as she walked hand in hand with Brandine. "But it wasn't my worst. That's the sad part." "Ah, it's okay." Brandine nudged her with his arm. "Finn's going through a rough time. I've gone through some stuff like that and I got better. He will too." "I'm not so sure," Adriana mumbled. "He's been like this ever since Binnen died. Just stupid. Him and his friends. Especially Kale. I can't stand him." "I don't blame you." Brandine shook his head. "That guy's a piece of work." Hey, Adriana appeared at the Haddock home's doorstep. "Did you put this here?" She picked up a sizable, square parcel. "No," Brandine replied. "Why?" "It's a present, I think." Adriana eyed the purple flower tied to the package. "For me?" "Well, whoever left it obviously didn't know you don't wear flowers anymore." Brandine watched her unwrap the present tentatively. Adriana yanked off the last bit of paper and let out a scream of excitement. Out fell a book with a picture of an older man, a young woman, and a blue box. She began to jump up and down. "What?" Brandine raised an eyebrow at this bizarre explosion of emotion. "It's the next Spaceman book," Adriana squealed. How did they get it?" "It's brand new. I didn't even know it was out yet." She looked up at him. Are you sure it wasn't you? I really wish it were. It's making you giddy. Brandine laughed. But alas, no, it wasn't. It was probably my dad then. Adriana stared at the book, furrowing her brow. But no, he wouldn't just leave it on my doorstep. Matilda. Brandine suggested. She got me the book about the 7 people trapped on an island. Adriana reminded him. I can't imagine who got me this, but I want to thank them so badly. Well, maybe you've got a secret admirer. Brandine frowned. In which case, you've got to keep your wits about you. Maybe. Adriana said dismissively. But at least this gives me a challenge. Brandine grinned and took Adriana's hand. 1 year, I'm going to give you the best birthday present ever. That's a promise. You don't have to. Adriana's cheeks went a bit pink. I want to. Brandine let go of her hand. Now go find out what happens in your book. Happy birthday, Nani. Thank you, she kissed him on the cheek and immediately opened the book up. Nani. Wham. Adriana had run headlong into the front door. Brandine doubled over in silent guffaws, but she seemed quite unabashed. Rather than look up from her precious book, she felt around for the handle of the door and pushed it in. When she had closed it behind her, Brandine's laughter ceased. Who was this mysterious gift-giver? Was he a secret admirer? Was it a she? Who would give Adriana an anonymous gift in the middle of the night? He had a sneaking suspicion, but if it was who he thought it was. Brandine began to stomp away, looking furious. No one was going to get in the way of him and Adriana. Not on his watch. Chapter 5, Raid. Chapter text. Bwam bwam bwam. The noise thundered through Finn's eardrums, making continued sleep completely impossible. He groaned and pulled his covers over his head. Though still reeling from the loud sounds that had awakened him, his head appeared to have been pounding all night. His ears picked up the painfully loud sound of the door being haphazardly flung open and 2 pairs of footsteps thumping around with no regard for his discomfort. A bright light shone through his blankets and the haddock boy finally opened his eyes to see his window wide open and 2 people staring down at him. Good morning, sleepyhead, bellowed a woman with tangled blonde hair and the wildest blue eyes Finn had ever seen. Her massive bosom heaved with restrained laughter at the sight of his hair, which was sticking out in all directions. Betcha had fun last night, didn't ya? Finn made a humming sound and attempted to burrow into his blankets some more. The second person yanked off his bed coverings, exposing him to the much cooler air outside. Hey, what are you? Time to get up, shouted the second person, who Finn now recognized as his mother. No dilly-dallying when there's work to do. Finn sat up slowly and pressed his eyes into his palms. The little lights danced in front of him before one of his elbows was seized and he was forcibly yanked from bed. Go on, get up, get dressed, the other woman, who seemed to be Kamikaze the Crazy herself, nearly dragged him across the room to his closet. She had an alarmingly tight grip, so tight that when she let go, Finn felt pins and needles as he regained circulation. It's a bright, sunny day without a cloud in the sky. Perfect flying conditions, though of course, you won't have time for that, will you? What? Finn breathed. I can't, got a headache. Oh, I bet you do. Astrid exclaimed cheerfully as Kamikaze hauled him upright and began shoving clothes into his arms. Headaches are common in your condition, but that's what you get for your little indulgence last night. I was just. Finn began but realized a split second later that he really had no excuse. I have a headache, so can you just? No, we're not going to just. Kamikaze straightened him up to prevent him from slouching. He's a real mess in the mornings, isn't he, Astrid? I don't know about you, but I think an ice-cold bath would wake him up in no time. What? Finn shook his head, felt suddenly nauseous. No, I don't think I. That is an excellent idea, Kamikaze. In fact, we could draw it up right now. Help me get Finn down the stairs, will you? Astrid grabbed Finn's arm and hung on tightly. It would be my pleasure. Kamikaze agreed, grabbing Finn's other arm. The 2 women hauled Finn down the stairs so fast, Finn would have tripped down them had he not been held upright. Hiccup was waiting downstairs rather expectantly for them, a smirk on his face. "Ah, if it isn't our little drunkard himself," he said serenely. "Looks like he needs to wake up quickly if he's going to be reorganizing the entire filing system at the library." "What?" Finn shouted so loudly, he aggravated his own headache. "I've got work today." "Not anymore," Kamikaze said gleefully as she helped Astrid yank off his shirt and push him into the already full bathtub, shorts and all. "You look at him squirm." That sure woke him up in a hurry. Finn spluttered and gasped. "Why are you?" "I think the better question," Hiccup interjected over Finn's complaints, "is why were you out drinking last night instead of celebrating your birthday responsibly? And legally. I could throw you in jail for a week if I wanted. You humiliated yourself, you humiliated your sister, and you humiliated us." Astrid added. "That's not something we're going to be taking lightly." "What, you've never been drunk?" Finn shivered, not feeling coordinated enough to climb out of the tub while the room was still spinning. "Your mother hasn't?" Hiccup snapped. "As for me, I've only been drunk once, and believe me, if the reason you were drunk last night was the same as mine, we'd be having a very different discussion." Finn scowled. He wasn't going to press for details. Finally, using the sides to hoist himself up, he got out of the tub, dripping water all over the floor. "Now that you're all clean," Astrid tossed a towel at him and allowed him to dry his hair on his own, "you can get dressed and head over to the library. Matilda's got a lot for you to do and there's no time to waste if you want it all done today." "I'm not going over to the library." Finn threw his towel on the ground in his temper. "And it doesn't matter what I got up to last night. Everyone's doing it and they'll keep doing it whether you're being ridiculous about it or not." "That may be true, but you are the heir and you are held to a higher standard," Hiccup said calmly. Finn opened his mouth to retaliate, but the Haddock patriarch continued. "I know that's not fair, but if you want to be chief, you've got to act like one." "Says you," Finn grumbled. "But when I'm chief, I can run this island any way I want." Hiccup crossed his arms. "That's why I'm working so hard on you. So you'll want to be a good leader. And right now, that means filing with Matilda. This doesn't have to be a bad thing, your sister loves her. Perhaps you could learn a few things." "My sister doesn't do anything wrong." Finn scowled at his father as he threw on a clean shirt. "Now if you don't mind, I need to put on some clean pants and I can take care of that by myself," he added, waving them away with his hands. Hiccup shrugged and allowed Astrid and Kamikaze to leave the room before shutting the door. He turned to Astrid. "You did a pretty good job," he told her with a sigh. "I left him some breakfast in there too and had Stormfly guard the other exit." Astrid smiled proudly. "Hopefully he won't pull something stupid like that again. Honestly, I'm surprised he was this stupid to begin with." Kamikaze piped up. "Last time we met, he seemed to have a good head on his shoulders. For a boy, of course. He's a teenager." Hiccup said, more to himself than to Astrid or Kamikaze. "His body's being pumped with hormones every second of the day, of course he's going to act stupid. But that doesn't mean he's not old enough to know better. I think he'll come around." Kamikaze assured him in a surprisingly comforting manner. "He's got you as a dad. My dad just told me I was crazy and went off to find normal Vikings to live with. He's on Braun now, I still get letters. Well, that's not exactly an option for me." Hiccup ran his hands down his face. "I've got too much to do in addition to all the parenting challenges that are becoming more stressful than regulating an entire village. That's why I came here." Kamikaze affectionately punched his shoulder, causing him to stumble back. "You sounded really stressed out in your letters, so I thought you needed someone to come cheer you up and yell at your kids so you didn't have to. Don't you have your own village to run?" Hiccup asked, rubbing the area she had punched and almost feeling the developing bruise through his shirt. "My mother can take care of it for a few days." Kamikaze waved away his concerns. "Besides, I like you. You're the only man I've ever met who isn't as stupid as a squashed fly when it comes to leading his people." "Gee, thanks." Hiccup gave her a deadpan expression but was inwardly pleased that she considered him worth her attention. He felt like that was a good sign, especially coming from someone who had grown up watching her mother refuse to ally themselves with the rest of the archipelago until he had come along. "Finn," he pounded on the door. You can't possibly need 10 minutes to put on a pair of. Finn threw the door open and treated his family, minus Adriana, with a contemptuous glare. I'll just be going then. Kamikaze perked up. I'll take you to Melinda's. Matilda's. Whatever. She grabbed Finn's upper arm in her usual firm grip and yanked him out the front door. Finn was beginning to regret giving her a tour of the island the day before. Hiccup turned to Astrid after shutting the front door. I guess I'd better get to work too, he sighed. Tell Addie not to go to the library today. The last thing he needs right now is her bursting in and annoying him. Will do. Astrid kissed Hiccup's cheek. I'll clean up around here before heading off to the academy. She eyed the mess her son had made with a frown. And here I was thinking that teenagers would be neater than little kids. Funny how fast we forget what adolescence was like. Hiccup kissed her chastely on the lips before leaving the house, hoping that this was the last crisis he'd have to deal with for a while. Inga Jorgensen and Alton Brand were about the most unlikely friends you could imagine. Inga was a thin 11-year-old girl who was tall for her age and had a tendency to be completely blunt and honest, regardless of the consequences. Alton was 12 years old and a few inches shorter. He was also extremely excitable. Anyone might have thought that sort of friendship would burn out fast. But a year later, they were still going strong. It wasn't hard to locate them if you knew how to look. You only had to imagine the most dangerous place to be on Berk and then you would stumble upon them daring each other to do the impossible. It was for this reason that Mara had started telling them that she'd have some of the builders erect a wall around the areas in which Inga and Alton most liked to play. But the pair of them scoffed at her words and continued to make stupid decisions, some of which landed them in her presence again and again. On this particular day, the friends could be found at a small cove on the west side of the island. Alton was, as usual, being incredibly persuasive. It's not that far, he was saying cheerfully to his reluctant friend. Just a few steps and you'd be across it and no one would know. It's like you're trying to kill me. Inga retorted with an impish grin on her face. Think you'll get my vast wealth if I snuff it before I turn 12? Vast wealth? Alton scoffed. You couldn't trade everything you owned for a copper piece. Sentimental value trumps anything. Inga crossed her arms and fixed her friend with an intimidating gaze that made him giggle. And besides, you're the one who will die first. Oh yeah? Yeah. Well, I'm not a chicken. Alton stepped up on a shaky log which had fallen across the cove. Watch me get all the glory and cross this in 20 seconds flat. Go ahead. Inga put her hands on her hips and stuck her tongue out at him. I will. Alton began to cross the log, a confident smile on his face as he walked. See? It's so easy, a toddler could do it. So easy, you could do it. Inga's light blue eyes sparkled with mischief as she suddenly leaned over and gave the log a good shake. Alton let out an indignant yell and plunged into the water below. You cheater, he bellowed at his cackling friend. You didn't say I couldn't do that. Inga retorted with glee. And look at you, you're fine. Alton swam as fast as he could to the shore, grumbling to himself. As he approached his friend, he heard another laughing voice echoing above them. Both Inga and Alton looked up to see Kurt walking toward them, laughing so hard it was a wonder they hadn't heard him earlier. Alton's face went bright red. Nice going, little brother. Kurt grasped Alton's arm and yanked him to shore, still laughing hysterically. You looked like you were about to topple off a 100-foot cliff when you lost your footing. Well, he was acting rather full of himself. Inga added as she watched the brothers smacking each other playfully. Ah, that's ally for ya. Kurt rumpled the boy's hair, causing Alton to glower at him. My name's not Ally, he snipped. And I meant to do that. Sure you did. Kurt rolled his eyes. Almost as much as I mean to do this. Kurt suddenly gave his younger brother a hard shove. Inga was delighted to see her friend topple into the water yet again. However, Alton had been half expecting this and grabbed Kurt's arm as he went down. Kurt let out a yell as he too tumbled over his brother and into the cold pond. You little how dare you. Kurt splashed Alton with the freezing water, causing his brother to laugh and splutter. You're supposed to respect your elders. Yeah, when they're ancient. Alton bellowed, splashing Kurt back. Are you telling me you're really 100 years old? Because I'm pretty sure you're only 22, a wise elder. Don't get smart with me, I can put you over my knee and spank you for that. Kurt snorted. Yeah right. Watch me. Guys. Inga called, her face alight with laughter. You could just get out of the water. A sudden tidal wave soaked her as both Kurt and Alton splashed her at once. She let out an indignant howl and dove into the water after them, sending freezing water into their faces. All right, who invited the girl out? Kurt shouted when Inga punched him rather hard on the shoulder.